Today is the 7th of July 2023, and this is a conversation between Emilio Longo and Julian Bruere. Julian, welcome to Skill-Based Art, a learning resource for art students and artist teachers. Thank you for providing us with this opportunity to speak with you today.
Emilio, thanks very much for having me. Pleasure working with you this morning and today.
Fantastic. Looking forward to getting into it. Now, starting with an introduction, Julian. You were born in 1959 in Eltham, Victoria. You are a renowned Melbourne-based watercolourist who draws on a variety of themes with a particular interest in maritime subjects, portraiture and landscapes that often feature alpine snow gum trees. You have an appreciation for the past traditions of art and understanding of how it was done and the significance of the painted subjects. Your formal education includes a graduate diploma in graphic design from RMIT University in 1980, which led you to embark on numerous artistic and illustrative jobs, starting out in an illustration studio working on advertising, storyboarding and retail illustration, then freelancing after a few years working for advertising agencies on St Kilda Road in Melbourne. Subsequently, you progressed into book illustration, where you illustrated over 75 educational children's books, followed by working in the animation field as a background artist, painting alpine backgrounds for the Silver Brumby animated television series. Following this, you maintained a job as a product and real estate artist until becoming dedicated to teaching watercolour and committing to being a professional painter, teacher, and also judge around Melbourne, primarily at the Victorian Art Society and Rotary art shows, where you continue to conduct workshops and give demonstrations on a regular basis. You show your paintings regularly in exhibitions around Australia and abroad, and you have travelled and painted internationally, including Europe in 2011, New Zealand in 2014, China in 2016, and England during 2017. In China, you exhibited as a guest artist in Dalian, and you are a regular Australian representative watercolour artist at the Fabriano Watercolour Biennale International Prize in Italy. You were selected as an international artist in 2019 for Flowing Water, an international watercolour biennale in Taiwan, and you participated in the first international online marine art exhibition featuring Australian marine art alongside other marine painting societies from America, Canada, France, and England in 2021 and 2022. For the past 12 to 14 years, you have been involved with FIVE, an annual group exhibition of select artists from the Victorian Artists Societies, who include Ted Danzy, Mary Hyde, Ray Hewitt, John Hunt, and yourself. However, the group included only Ted, Mary, Lucille Tam, and you in the later showings. You were awarded Victorian Artists Society of the Year in 2010, 2012, 2018, and 2022. You received the Best Traditional Work Mission to Seafarers ANL Maritime Award in 2009 and 2016, the Kenneth Jack Memorial Award in 2010 and 2014, and you were the Australian Guild of Realist Artists Medallion winner for 2013 and 2015. In 2020, you were the winner of the Australian Watercolour Muster, and your watercolour paintings have been featured in the Art of Watercolour and Australian Artist magazine several times. This year, you were made the Victorian President of the Australian Society of Maritime Artists, and you will be running their national exhibition in Melbourne for the first time, as it's been held in Sydney for the past 25 years, being that they have the greater membership. You are a past treasurer of the Victorian Art Society, the Watercolour Society of Victoria, and the Australian Watercolour Institute. You were also a member of the 20 Melbourne Painters Society until February 2019. Now, Julian, your surname Bruere is French. However, your father was from New Zealand. Your mother, Marion Bruere, was an oil painter who was recognised in the Eltham art scene in the 1970s and 1980s, and in fact is still painting today. You have mentioned that your mother always supported your pursuit of art. Can you recall your childhood and the memories you have growing up and seeing your mother working as a painter?
Yeah, look, I think my mum was a very decent oil painter in her own right, and at that time in Eltham there was quite an art scene developing. She was one of the early setups of the Diamond Valley Art Society. So a founding member with Digby Watson and Mary Jupp and a number of other painters. Colin Waddingham was another one. And so as about a 9 to 12-year-old, I was kind of the youngest of three boys. I was taken along to a lot of those art society openings and demonstration days and the like, and had a chance to be the portrait model on a few occasions. So it was kind of a very early introduction to the art field that I was later to follow. And I owe a lot to Mum, because I reckon she really did want to look after and encourage my art as it developed. So I showed signs as an early kid of being a reasonable drawer, and I think encouragement was always offered. So it was a really good beginning for an artist to have that sort of thing. And you'll find there are good artists out there that have similar stories where they've just had a huge family influence, and you often see family connections in art.
That's great, Julian, and that's so important to have that family support. Now, you mentioned that your mother is still working today, is that correct?
Yeah, look, still a painter, and I've been doing some online watercolour classes. Mum was never too old to learn a new trick, so she's been doing some of the watercolour classes. She started off as an oil painter, studied under Alan Martin, had a fairly bad car accident at one stage where she rolled a car 3 or 4 times. How she walked out, we don't know, but it did mean her arm was knocked around pretty badly at the time in the shoulder. So later on, oil painting became harder and watercolour became an avenue to keep painting. And I think possibly with the understanding of the medium, she's always said that she thinks it's a much better medium to work in anyway.
Fantastic. Well, good on her. She's still painting today. That's
Indeed,
great.
Yep, very, very active.
Sure. Now, I understand you went to Eltham High School. How did you engage with art in art class and during your time at home with family?
I think, ironically, I was possibly a bit of an arrogant kid, thought I could paint and draw pretty well, and so wasn't really listening to my secondary school art teacher, which I think you can have a smile at. And I think they were possibly trying to encourage me. I think they were distracting me. So I was lucky to actually pass art in high school. How you fail art in high school, I'm not sure. But, no, look, I think I was working more outside at that stage, and I think my real work was, or painting at a very early age, was in sort of weekends and private time. I was sort of burrowing into my maritime history even at that age, reading my books and setting up sea battles, and I don't think it worked. So I wasn't a very good art student.
Sure. Now, your love of maritime subjects began as a kid through collecting and reading pirate and sea adventure books such as Treasure Island, Moonfleet, the Hornblower series, Bolitho, and other historical reference books that featured images of sailing ships and sea battles by authors such as Archibald, Pope, Lavery, and O'Brien. Your favourite books were the ones depicting ships in battles and men of war, from the Spanish Armada to Trafalgar. In fact, to this day, you have a bookshelf which contains your collection of these books from over 50 years. Recollecting your early exposure to the images in these books, what was it in particular about them that captured your imagination?
Look, I think probably the key book that would influence me is Dad used to like to read stories to his sons, and me particularly as the last one, and he read Treasure Island, but he didn't read it once. We read it about 30 times, so there was no choice but to enjoy it. But I think I fell in love with the cast of pirates, and then that naturally led on to a boyhood love of gunfire and macabre perhaps. So there was that kind of story and narrative that came to life with it, and Dad sold it very well. He was pretty good with his reading, and I just continued on. And I think you find an area that appeals to you, and it just can take hold of you. I always personally feel I'm glad that I discovered my interest in marine and maritime stories before I actually developed as a painter, because I was pretty young when I started to like them all. Sure. And then it became a natural resource to draw and paint into.
So your father would read these stories to you, show you the illustrations, and you really just fell in love with some of the images.
If I can So these are some of Dad's Treasure Island safes. He had these as a boy. He was born in 1925, and this is a edition from 1930, which has got the photographs from the very original film. So they're the black and white film shots, and as you can see, it's just falling apart. And that was his favourite, and I stole that off him. And my favourite was another one he had, which was the same time. And again, it had the illustrations watercolour by Munro S. Orr. And I don't know very much about him other than I've always loved the illustrative finish to them. So they kind of connected with my subject, and then that interest in painting and art just flowed from there as we went along. I'll put those aside up there.
Your father, Julian, was he into art himself?
No, Dad was a research chemist with CSIRO, and I think Mum sort of always wanted to paint as a younger person, but I think sometimes we think about the 60s and the 70s of being a great period of emancipation, but I think a lot of women artists actually had to still find themselves doing what they perceived as the family duties at the time. And Mum was a case in point where she painted, but only when I was at school. And then she took up painting in her late 30s and became a very good oil painter. So she kind of put a family first, and then career came along afterwards. And possibly out of that, she may not have had the full career she could well have had as a painter in those times, because a good oil painter could do really well. And she had very successful exhibitions, but I think she was always quietly caring, and that's why I sort of feel I owe a bit of a debt to her.
Sure.
And I think vicariously she lives through my art as well. So I think the successes I had, I blame my parents.
Well, that's lovely, Julian. Now, studying the illustrations in these books naturally led to your interest in drawing and painting, which eventuated into a love for historically based paintings. At this early point in your life, who were some of the painters you were studying?
Perhaps more the books and the period styles was more of the drive. So I think my real interest became in from Spanish Armada all the way through to Trafalgar. And the books I had a lot of the paintings out of the National Maritime Museum in England, in Greenwich, and I've been there to see some of those works on trips.
Oh, great.
And so those are, Abram and Stork's Battle of the Nile, and there's the Van der Velde oil paintings. And so these are all 17th and 18th century oil painters, but their emotion that they put into their paintings was the kind of the capture, but also they had this lovely accuracy that you could understand what the ships were doing, you could see what the rigs were, you could see what the gilding or the decorations were. So that was more my fascination. It was almost, if I hadn't been a painter, I would have been a model maker.
Sure. And
followed it into that area. And then out of that emerged some of the painters, like Turner would be the obvious one that everybody would cite, but there's equally Pocock and who else was around that time? Later on, there was, I'll come back to other ones.
Sure.
Sorry, missing the memory goes on some of these, but there's a wealth of them that were painting in watercolour and oil.
Great, Julian. It seems as though you didn't have a natural command of drawing in your youth. As I understand, you were frustrated with your drawing and painting abilities, as your technical understanding at this point would not enable you to realise the ideas behind your vision. You identified that formal training in watercolour was necessary, however, that never happened. Why did you not pursue training in watercolour?
I did follow some of it, but I'll come back to that one. The drawing one's a really interesting one. I think there was never any shortage of interest and encouragement, and in sometimes I think you can have a false encouragement from family, friends, thinking you're a great drawer. And so in that statement when I made that, I was sort of reflecting that you can get a perception of how well you draw, and as you start to draw reasonably well, you learn just how inadequate your drawing abilities are. And as much as drawing is a part of your development as a painter, I think more so is your dedication in your work that you put into, and probably like a pianist has to really practice their scales and their run. I'm not a musician in any shape or form for good reason.
Sure.
But I think drawing is the same. It's got the same sort of disciplines that are required, understanding what happens to light and shade and when you're rendering up. So all the old traditions of painting come into play there. I suspect that it's easy to be confident and arrogant about what you're doing and get away with it, but you never can lie to yourself. You end up addressing your own needs and explore further and further into your own painting.
Right.
And then in a similar way, I was self-taught as a watercolourist to begin with, and I think the only time I really sought any sort of help was when I was sought out some of the workshops and did a term or two with Joseph Zabuchvik, who was the gun painter, obviously.
Sure.
But equally was Greg Allen and David Taylor, and I had lessons or workshops with them for very short times. But it's very easy to absorb their message and start to want to be them and echo them. And I think at a level you also as an artist have that independent streak. So I took on board what I could, so I feel like I stole stuff from them. But then you try to own it and make it your own and develop it. But
Sure.
they certainly helped with really good shortcuts.
Right, sure. Now, considering that you had no formal education in watercolour, how were you first introduced to the medium?
I think I did graphic design, and the instantaneous drying of watercolour for a student who's doing their assignments on a Sunday night during a Monday kind of worked out. And illustration was very much drawing, pen and ink, and watercolour washes was a real standard go-to. Gouache was the other one, and they're both quick-drying mediums. So they became the interest, and possibly because Mum was an oil painter, that also means that you want to continue on, but with your own brush.
Sure, absolutely. Now, after finishing high school in 1977, you began studying graphic design at RMIT University. Why did you choose to study design over fine art?
Yeah, look, RMIT, if anyone ever went there, they had three stratas. They had industrial design, they had graphic design, and they had fine art on the top floor. And I'm sure that's how they saw the hierarchy. And as a student, you got your HSC marks, and you just applied for everything. So I applied for all three of them. And industrial design, they said, oh, you'll do well up on the next floor. And fine art said, you'll do well on the next floor down. So you go to the interviews. And I reckon I was lucky, because graphic design at that stage was still a hands-on, there was a pre-digital age. So you're still learning the skills of how to handle gouache, how to work with a ruling pen, brush ruling, which we showed in the demonstration, or will show in the demonstration. These sort of old illustrative skills which came from ticket writing and logo designs and working with your hands into graphics have really been my studied area in my own painting.
Sure.
And so for that reason, I reckon I was always blessed. And there was a couple that I like to remember. There was Dawson MacDonald, and I don't know what happened to him, but Dawson was just such a draw. He looked a dead ringer for Humphrey Bogart. And if you got him before lunch, he was an excellent teacher, and he was an even better one after lunch. And Wilby Rackman was another one, and he was the one that taught us brush ruling, and he was a disciplinarian. It took us 6 months to get any assignments that he would accept.
Wow.
And there was an old guy, George Santos, ran the department, and he was an old American ad man. And I reckon at the time we didn't really value exactly what they had to offer. And the final one in that was Paul Warner, and he came from New South Wales. His father was a watercolourist, and he taught graphic design. And in all that time, I never saw a watercolour from him, and I wished we'd known more about each other, the directions, and where he'd come from. I'd like to have had a chat with him. His watercolour was quite exquisite.
Great, great. Now, can you provide some insight into what your graphic design training encompassed at RMIT? I imagine much of what you were doing would have been pre-digital.
Very much pre-digital, and it was on the horizon, but no one understood it. And I don't think anyone believed it was coming through. There was a couple that were sort of fairly clever looking at it. But, you know, this is the time of Atari, bat tennis and things like that. So it was all very early. I think what I learned was the very tangibility of hand lettering and marking up layouts, working with the old yoke and markers, doing storyboard work or designs. And out of those, I think you had a decent sense of being a drawer in your art and in your graphic design. And more than that, it sort of provided you the opportunity that you could actually make a living out of your hands. And there was a guy called Dick Ison who was a bit of an influence. He was an old advertising manager at the Herald, and at a very early age I was helping him build a house over summer holidays, and he used to nail a $50 bill halfway up the A-frame and said, when you've finished the day, go and get it, sort of stuff. And that was pretty good coin at that stage. But he was, being an advertising man, he reckoned I had a green worm in my head.
Okay.
I think he meant I was money hungry.
Oh, I see.
But,
right.
but then I kind of felt like it was nice to go into graphic design and advertising ultimately, just because it meant you're using your hands as an artist, but you were actually making an income out of it.
With your study in RMIT, Julian, with graphic design, did you focus much on perspective?
Yeah, I think all of those old areas came into play. That we did quite complex in industrial drawing, perspective work, axonometric drawings, all of those sort of things were in there. And equally, they did a lot of life drawing. So that was in there as well. So for a graphic design course, I figured maybe drawing people for storyboards and the like. But so kind of opposite ends. So it was a very rounded sort of drawing experience.
That's fantastic.
And you know, we'd compare notes with anyone doing fine art upstairs, and they were doing lots of life drawing, but they didn't have a clue about perspective.
Sure. Great. Now, while you were completing your graphic design training at RMIT, I understand Paul Warner was one of your lecturers. What kind of influence did he have on you? Now, you've mentioned Paul already.
Yeah. I think in turn what it is, it's you reflect on missed opportunities in life, and he was sort of at Victorian Art Society at the time when I was at RMIT, and he was teaching at RMIT because they're just near each other down the road. And there was one time when I did an assignment, and he waxed lyrical over the qualities of my watercolour background and the softness of the atmospherics of it. And I little understood what he was talking about. He really understood what he was talking about.
Sure.
But I did take the compliment.
Great. Now, in 1980, you graduated from RMIT with a graduate diploma in graphic design, which led to your first job at Acme Art Studio in 1981. It is here that you developed your drawing skills doing line drawings of stereo equipment and speakers for Penny Lane Audio. Can you provide some insight into what your job at Acme Art Studio involved and how you developed your drawing skills during this time?
Yeah, look, I think you come out of RMIT after 3 years study and you think you're really hot. You think like, we've got it. And a mate of mine, Jeremy Perrott, he and I were fairly thick. We'd gone up and down St Kilda Road doing a spurious assignment talking about the creative process in advertising. And he walked into an advertising agency and subsequently became a very strong creative director in an agency. And I walked into an art studio where everyone was at their desk drawing and painting, and I thought, this is pretty cool, I can do this. And so Frank Nicol was the old boss with Brian Lively, his partner, and somehow I fluked a job there. And even today I have no idea how that could possibly have happened, but anyway, we got there. And then that's the real sobering moment in life when you realise you think you're really, really good. Your mum's told you how good you are, your college has been telling you how well you are, and then you actually meet some real illustrators. And I think this is the truth about youth meets experience.
Sure.
Very, very sobering. My favourite time was doing a storyboard. I'd spent all weekend on it, and it was for Gatorade, and it involved people drinking Gatorade or something along those lines. Staminade, I think it might have been. Anyway, at the end of the weekend, Frank Nicol, the boss, came in to look at the work, and it was meant to be delivered down to the agency that morning, and he took one look at it and said, yeah, it's really nice, but why does everyone's head look like a robber's dog? And so Mike Wilkin, who was the gun illustrator in the place, redrew all the heads, and I had the joy of cutting them out and sticking them on top of my other work.
Wow.
So in terms of sobriety, it's a moment where you actually realise what it takes, and I think that little experience is a lovely double take where you reevaluate. So going back to what you don't know,
Sure.
you only find out as you progress along.
Right.
And if you're smart enough, you take the knock.
Sure.
And work forward.
Great. Fantastic. Now, following this job at Acme Art Studio, you embarked on a series of employment opportunities that included freelance advertising, publishing, and painting animation backgrounds. At one point, you were creating real estate drawings for the Age newspaper classifieds, where you further refined your understanding of perspective and light and dark. These various jobs occupied your time between 1983 to 2010. Beginning with your job in freelance advertising, what kind of work were you doing?
When I first started out, we're doing a lot of storyboarding for commercials, poster work, and there was a lot of retail line drawing. If you think about the papers in those days, they weren't all photographed. There was a lot of line drawings of things. So they teach you how to simplify stereo equipment down. You learn to do your ellipses, you learn to get the buttons in the right place, you get very clean and precise. At the time we thought it was really frustrating because it was at a time when stereo equipment shifted from lovely silvers, which were beautiful to render, to black.
Okay.
Which gave you no help at all. You had to work out how to save the whites for buttons and show them out. So again, skill learning, and without having an academic or the old Victorian College Arts sort of training, I wrote somewhere that was my training. That's where I learnt skills to make things look like things, how to simplify, how to nut them out and work them out.
Sure.
And storyboards gave you a lovely speed, and because everything was wanted overnight. So they were good experiences, yeah.
Great. And you found that your technical drawing abilities really advanced in that time?
You had to, because I went freelance very early. I was about 24 when I went freelance, because I was smart enough to see the sums that they would pay you as a salary and what they were getting as an hourly rate and what they were doing. And it was just prior. 83 became along, and I went freelance at about a time when there was a massive recession.
Okay.
So at that stage, you really had to scratch around for your work. You had to work hard, and perhaps I worked pretty cheap at the time, but I was newly married at the time and had a mortgage going. So you kind of had to really chase hard to get the work. I think it was always a pressure. Everything was wanted overnight, so you'd do many all-nighters. And I think at the same time, advertising and illustration, but particularly the advertising field, was being chased by the digital realm.
Right.
And it was sort of just coming in behind. So just about every job I ever worked on, eventually digital realm would come in and it would take over, and you either jumped into it or you had to move and find another direction to work in with your hands. And I think I've always wanted the tangibility of hands, so I proudly think of all the businesses that I've gone out of business in.
Now, you also worked in publishing, where you illustrated over 75 children's educational reading books. Can you provide more insight into your time working as an illustrator of children's books and how your drawing and painting techniques developed?
So around the same time as moving away from the more overnight stuff of advertising, I enjoyed the idea of working with a script and then doing your layouts and then developing into your paintings. And the irony is that a book is a long time published, and I don't think I reflect back on the books with great pride on what the product was, but you develop and you learn. So as a learning place, it was terrific. And I was also exploring my own watercolour at that stage in painting. So I use the books as a way of exploring watercolour as well. So mine had a linear and a drawn aspect, but they had a lot of painterly technique going into it as well.
Sure.
And perhaps I was still raw and naive enough to make them work as educational children's books, but also I was developing skills with the paint that I didn't know of at the time.
Great. And that job illustrating children's books, were you able to support yourself solely by doing that?
Mostly, yeah, mostly you could, but partner at the time was working as well, so it was a joint partnership. But publishing work also meant, because I had a young family, that I could be a work-at-home dad and paint.
Oh,
so I did a lot of work at night and childcare in the middle of it. So
sure,
yeah,
fantastic.
So that life balance is nice.
Great. Now, I imagine working as an illustrator and being forced to meet strict deadlines would have made you more of an efficient painter. Did you find this to be the case?
Yeah, you'd think that, wouldn't you? But look, I think what it did was it alerted to you what you could achieve in short time with pressure, and that does pay off. Whenever you'd work in a demonstration, there's training in there that really keeps you paced and moving along. Left to do a painting on my own, I'll just dawdle along all day on it with lots of interruptions and coffees. So it gave me that sort of training, but I think mostly it gave you the ability to tell pork pies on why the job was running late. There was a lot of time where there'd be illustrators down in the pub at the Court Jester, and around about 2 o'clock we'd be all nicking back home or back to the office to make a phone call saying, look, not tonight after all, see you Monday morning. So it set us up for weekend work. But
Sure.
But and the other one was in publishing. That was the same sort of deal. You were able to spin the deadlines out because they weren't real deadlines. They were just sort of a date that had been put on a contract, and you should stick to them. Not sure I did. I think I was always begging for about an extra 2 weeks.
Now, during this period of your life, you also worked in the animation industry. What was your experience like working in animation, and how did it come to be that you were responsible for painting alpine backgrounds for the Silver Brumby animated television series?
I think what it really happened was that I had started working on snow gum paintings as a painting direction that I really did enjoy, and so at a very early stage I was sort of doing these big panoramic snow gum scenes which would drift around, and I'd done a number of walks up in the alpine areas and had one magic time where I took some photos in a lovely mist, and that became the sort of the signature of the paintings that I wanted to do. And it was seen by someone who was preparing the animation series, and they didn't have any idea what they were going to do with the background other than they were alpine, and so it became a lovely link. So they saw one painting of mine and they said, yeah, that's the look, we want to get into it. And it was kind of a fascinating field. I loved it because everyone was at their desk working, and I'd always loved that idea of people working in a group on paintings, and they were doing the animation, the line drawing of the horses and things, and I was doing these backgrounds for them to trot around and look good against. But it was a really lovely, it was an exciting sort of a thing. You were creating a product over time in a community, and I think that was the real fascination of it. And I was lucky I was sort of the kingpin of the backgrounds, which was kind of nice for the ego. But it was hard work, but it was good pay, and it was a good activity and very naturally fitted into what I wanted to be doing with painting.
Sure. So if you're painting backgrounds for animation sets, Julian, I imagine you'd have been painting quite large?
No, not specifically. No, but they had sort of got some, it was a marriage between hard drawing and digital. So they were actually really around, they were quite wide because they were doing scanning and panning sort of shots, being the horses running through bush, and you'd be doing a bit like the old Disney layered sort of animation with the glass panels, but they could actually have 4 or 5 different paintings and then sandwich them together and move them around to create the illusion of movement. So it was a really exciting sort of exploration, new at that stage, because we're talking about 1994, thereabouts, so I think that's where it's going. So had advertising work still going on, but enjoyed that time there.
Great. Were they done in gouache? Or?
No, watercolour.
Watercolour on paper?
Yep. And it was fine while they were textured, and it was difficult when we came to skies and the texture of the paper was showing through photographically, and they didn't like that. So in the end, they sort of sandwiched photos of skies in with painted. It was a bit of a hodgepodge.
Sure. Interesting.
Interestingly, I've never ever seen any of the episodes. I've never watched them.
Is that right?
Never watched them. No, and half the animation crew never saw them. And so they would do their little moment, they'd do their job, and we'd see the rushes at each Friday night, but never watched the TV series, but my mum taped them.
Oh, that's great. Do you still have access to those tapes?
Well, what do you do with a VHS tape now?
That's true.
Exactly.
That's true. Now, in 2005, you finished illustrating a book which you were working on for many years titled The True Adventures of John Nichol. I understand the book focuses on the 18th century Scottish sailor John Nichol and his stories at sea. Your illustrations ultimately depict the stories in very fine detail. Can you provide some insight into your experiences illustrating this book and how you developed the paintings for it?
Yeah, look, originally it was going to be a full-colour book, and time constraints and my organisation at the time led them to being really rendered pencil drawings, but I didn't mind that. That was actually worked quite well, and it was a good experience and a bad experience all at the time. At that time of my life wasn't the best time of my life, I'll probably sum up, and the book was sort of kind of a bit of a haunt that had to be done. I'd taken a retainer to do it, and I had to do it. The project itself I really wanted to do, though. It was such a lovely narrative that connected all the things I was interested in maritime history. So it took, some of the early battles of Cape St Vincent and Camperdown. There was the Lady Juliana, which sailed out to Australia with the second fleet, and it was the one that brought all the women. There was a book written called The Brothel Ship, and John Nicol was on that voyage.
Okay.
So there's the things that we could relate to. It had maps. It had all sort of things that I wanted to work on. So as a project, it was a really good project. And again, you get so wise after you finish something, and a book's published for a long time. I'd love to have done it again.
Sure. Now, that book, is that still in print today?
No, I think it had a print run of about 5,000. I don't think it was ever going to beyond that. Okay. But it is in a number of school libraries. And as such, it didn't pay much at the time for a retainer. I think it was only about 2,000, and there was, lots and lots of hours into it.
Sure.
But it's ended up being in a school library, and school libraries often have lending rights and photocopy rights. And so there's a nice little check comes in every year from that one that
Great.
Is a nice surprise.
That's fantastic. Good. Now, in 2007, you began to focus on teaching watercolour while still completing some work as a commercial artist on the side, up to about 2010, when you dedicated yourself to teaching and painting full-time. Why did you initially start teaching watercolour?
Watercolour was the medium I selected and decided on, and possibly I could equally have liked to have gone into oil paint and developed oil paint, but that was the one I was strongest on with all the illustration work that I'd done in the past. Advertising at that stage was in a real change in what it was doing. It was becoming very much digital focus. Everyone was on their Macs, and I think I just really loved the tangibility of working with hands on paper, perhaps your old training, perhaps where your own persuasion is. But it was a good field to be working into. And then as advertising disappeared, it's almost like it left me than I left it. It sort of moved on and went into its own path, and I never kept up with it, but then followed into teaching and painting in watercolour. Sure. as almost like a last resort. I'd probably be broke by now if I hadn't been able to teach.
Sure.
It brought out things in me I didn't know I had. I think teaching's actually, you'll know yourself, you find things about yourself in teaching because you're in the moment. You can be centre stage. You have to have the answers, right. or if you don't have the answers, be able to either fake it or redirect it or show a way through it. And I think teaching was like that. It put you on, made you understand what you were doing a little bit more.
Sure.
As a painter, I think it really helps your development. I think having to explain what you're doing, and like in a demonstration, the same thing, doing a narrative through it, actually helps you to understand why you're doing the steps you're doing it.
Sure, absolutely. That's well said. Well said, Julian. As mentioned previously, in 2010, you stopped working as a commercial artist altogether. Why did you choose to stop? Now, you have touched upon that somewhat. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I think I was happy for it wound up. I think sometimes decisions you don't necessarily make are sometimes the best decisions that can happen to you. I think if real estate illustration had been continuing on, that was the ironic. I mean, I was enjoying illustration in a studio where we just did real estate, and I started doing sort of 10 drawings of houses a day. Okay. And so there was a big volume. I was going out measuring floors, and I reckon I could have even been doing it today if it had continued on, but the age went to full colour. Okay. And the moment it went to full colour, all retail drawings stopped overnight and just went to photographs. And it's one of those moments, those serendipity moments where you think, yep, there's a message here.
There's time to get out.
And at the time you're resentful, and in the end, you think, well, wasn't that a lucky time? So the best and worst of moments.
Right. As a watercolour teacher, you have taught in a variety of artist societies around Victoria, and you have judged a number of Rotary exhibitions. Majority of art societies in Victoria have a lineage that goes back to the Heidelberg School and Max Meldrum. What are your thoughts on Victorian art societies and Rotary exhibitions in relationship to teaching, workshops, demonstrations, and exhibitions?
Yeah, I think all of them, I'll perhaps separate them from societies into Rotary exhibitions just for a minute and say, I think societies are very important. I think all the people that matter to me I've met in art societies. I don't think I've met them outside. I think working in exhibitions in an art society, serving on committees, you learn something about other people around you, most of it good. I've always said in societies, committees, individually wonderful people, collectively questionable. But I think you learn something about different people, and everyone's got something to offer.
Sure.
Mary and I met through an art society. Friend John Hunt, who's now in Germany, we met through the Vic Arts when I first rolled in and he was the president. You work together on projects, and that continues now into the Australian Society of Marine Artists. I've got Mary as a VP, and I've got a friend of mine, Mark Bagley, as the treasurer. And in the Rotary shows, I think they open up the door for awards, and I think there's that side of art is half important, and it's not that you pursue them, but I think it's a lovely endorsement of what you're doing.
Sure.
And I think it then leads to people having an interest in what you're doing and wanting some of that as well, and that promotes teaching. And then if I would like to feel I'm fairly generous with passing on whatever I possibly can, because I think a lot of people have looked after me along the road. You feel like you feed it back where you can.
Right.
So I think the Rotary shows are probably a circuit that promote that, and then demonstrations through art societies or even within Rotary shows is kind of a good. And it's a pity, Rotary shows aren't always given a lot of honour for what they've provided artists. And most Rotarians are sitting there going, where would we be without our artists? But I think the question's better the other way around. Because I think, there's so many artists that have had great success out of that Rotary circuit. And tell you the truth, my work and the things that I'm working into, they're not going to be in mainstream galleries. It's going to be through that sort of space to be seen.
Sure, absolutely. Do you find in a lot of the art societies, Julian, there tends to be a lot of politics?
Yeah, I think it's probably part of the equation. I think people have ideas that they want to do, and I think art societies often lack a purpose sometimes after they're formed. They lose mandate as to why they stay working or why they stay there. And I don't think a society is healthy if it just stays there because it was there last year and it goes on. I think there's perhaps beholden on societies to keep questioning what their mandate is or to reinstitute what they're working on.
Sure.
And we've seen some unfortunate, like the Australian Guild of Realist Artists is all but gone. It may resurrect again, of course, and I wish it if it could. But they had an original mandate back in the 70s, and I think over time they may have lost that original direction, became a little bit, what would I say, a bit too generic, maybe a little bit too Camberwell centrified rather than Australian-based realist, lost the guild idea. I think Victorian Art Society is going in similar paths. I think they're kind of don't quite have an identity of being either a traditional or a contemporary or a professional body of both. I think it's becoming a little bit, I try to say it tactfully, I feel like it's losing its direction. And I don't know that some people in the society recognise that specifically.
Yeah. Well, it really is a shame about the Australian Guild of Realist Artists.
Yeah.
Hopefully it can be resurrected one day.
I think sometimes the other side, though, is doors close and open. And I know out of that, there's been a lot of energy thrown onto trying to save it or keep it going in one shape or form. And so even if they don't save it specifically as a society, I think it's alerted a number of artists to the need, perhaps the door needs to be kept open and that sort of more traditionally trained painting and value, because I think it's not necessarily the front runner or the key flavour at the moment, and I think maintaining it in some form is good for society.
Sure.
And out of it, whether people club together and do something new, and I like the idea that we should all write a new manifesto on things, I think, because we are facing art questions and directions.
Absolutely.
We were talking earlier about, digital realm, AI, all manner of things along those lines are going to be the challenges to tangible traditional art. And it's not that they're mutually exclusive, it's just how do they coexist.
Sure. Well said, Julian. Now, moving forward, as a teacher, you are highly recommended for your skills in the watercolour medium, which is driven by your enthusiasm and infectious passion and your generous nature. You educate students in the importance of drawing and structure in painting, much of which is exemplified in your own work. You usually focus on exploring the main genres of Western art with your students, such as landscape, still life, the figure, and portraiture, and you pay particular attention to teaching concepts concerning tone, form, composition, texture, colour, edges, and perception of depth. However, you do allow students to find their own confidence with the watercolour medium, as well as their style and understanding of subjects that interest them. Throughout your experiences teaching, what would you say are some of the most challenging concepts beginning students face when learning watercolour?
I'll go back to the drawing side of it. I think some of the ones to work with is I try to instill the idea that anyone can paint anything if they take the time and they create an observance of what they're trying to do. It won't necessarily happen automatically, but you can work towards it. I like the idea of saying a painting isn't the one moment. A painting actually can be a series of paintings leading to a conclusion. So the importance of each painting is diminished a little bit in terms of its growth rather than it's a finished piece in its own right.
Sure.
So failure then becomes educative and supportive of the next one and the next one, and that's probably a truth of all painting going through.
Sure.
In some of the fundamentals like portraiture, people enjoy sort of investigating proportion and lighting and construction of the face. There's often a interest in that, and I think that's the human side of it. People like the idea of being able to paint an eye and a nose and a mouth and making them work and understanding it. But I find if you go into perspective and architectural, then you'll lose half your audience immediately, because I think they see it as a very hard area and it's not sexy, whereas humanity is.
Sure.
But in watercolour, I think it's a medium that is very responsive and fluid and fun, and it provides quirks and it surprises. And it's frustrating because it's jolly and fun and it provides surprises and quirks. So all the things that are good about watercolour make it hard to be a watercolourist as you're developing.
Right.
I've often likened that watercolour is hard to get a handle on and really control early, but once you get a bit of a handle on it, it develops very well. Whereas oil painting, I think you can get a handle on it and make it work, but it's very hard to develop it further. You can sort of have fairly decent oil paintings, but then to really push it through, you have to have that knowledge of your colours and your tonal values to go forward with it. Whereas watercolour, once you've got the fun going, you can usually steer it into areas that are quite attractive, even if it's a looser or more creative fashion, or as an addition to a drawing. And, probably more laboured watercolour can almost prefer to be an oil painting. But at the same time, I still like to do that developed watercolour in my own work, but maintain some of that splash and dash that you get with the medium.
Sure. Now, your advice to beginners is usually to paint bigger. Do you find that beginners have a tendency to work small?
There's that, and I think you create a lot of monsters, I suspect, when you say this, but it's my painting experience in Rotary shows and the Vic Arts particularly, which is a big gallery space, big walls, is that there's a lot of small paintings by people that are developing, and it's almost a shyness to put their work in. And in those environments, they all but disappear. So every painting, if you think about a quarter sheet, disappears totally. A half sheet looks like a quarter sheet. A full sheet looks like a half sheet. An elephant sheet looks like a full sheet in those environments. So they look big in your studio and they shrink. So I always like the idea of go a bit bigger than you think you should, and you might probably find that the painting starts to feel about right in a showing.
Great, good advice. In 2019, you collaborated with fellow artist Ben Winspear to teach a watercolour and oil painting workshop at Studio 1310 in Malvern. In your experience, do you think oils or watercolour are more popular among students?
It's a really interesting premise at the moment as to under glass. So you notice how many oils are starting to be put under glass. And I almost feel like there's a glass fashion going at the moment, white frames and glass. And so I think that's part of what's happening. My mum was an oil painter and we had exhibitions back in Eltham in the early days, and Mary's an oil painter, and I think we like hanging together. So I think the two mediums hang respectfully together. I don't think one's better than the other, but I think, I would say watercolour's better, Mary will say oils are better, and rightfully, but they do coexist well. But Ben and I think because we were approaching it from that idea, we were looking at trying to get mood and atmosphere into each of the paintings. Watercolour is possibly good for a workshop because it cleans up quickly and dries, and everyone goes home easily with painting under their arm in a folio, whereas an oil paint, you've got to balance it as you're walking out across Malvern Road.
Sure.
But and I'm not sure if I've answered your question there properly or not, but Ben and I enjoyed that one just more for having our own personalities approaching it, and we kind of bounced off each other and kind of had a bit of a fun dig at the two mediums, but they're both terrific mediums to work in. We joke about it, but acrylic's an interesting third party to it, and there'll be oil and watercolour would suggest that acrylic is the medium for people who can't make up their mind, and that's not a truth. I think in more illustrative areas, acrylic is absolutely an excellent one, particularly even in maritime art. Its drying capacity means that you can then start putting sort of linear type detail into it, so for rigging or for detail on a second ward frigate, or like they're perfect for it. It's almost feels like a little bit of an advertising medium at the moment, but over time it'll be interesting to see how acrylic also holds its way. And I think of acrylic as being used in a more a traditional type sense rather than as an abstract sense. I think it's very much prevalent as the abstract medium because you can play over the wallpaper very quickly if you want to, but I see acrylic as also that that's say illustration area, and I use illustration as a positive term, not as a dismissive term.
Okay, sure, right.
Yeah, N.C. Wyeth, he illustrated Treasure Island as well, part of the Brandywine School, made a statement, and I wrestled with it for a long time. And he wrote somewhere, once an illustrator, always an illustrator. And I think a lot of illustrators are keen to distance from that and say, but I'm a painter now. And I suspect he's right. I think once an illustrator, you do have that investigative detailing in your work, and it haunts it through. And I see that as a positive. And if you look at the number of painters that came out of the 60s and the 70s, they didn't come out of art college or more traditional based. They were coming out of advertising and like my career even earlier. They were, that's where they got their training. And maybe that leads to that, you think about your Robert Millers and some of those early watercolourists. Dieter Prostner was another one. They kind of had an illustrative feel to their work when you see them in at the Vix in the permanent collection.
Sure.
But I see that as positive.
Right. So as a watercolourist, Julian, have you dabbled with oil painting much?
Yeah. When Mary and I first got together, I felt like, yep, this will be my time to be an oil painter. And then putting my oils up next to hers, I thought, I'm rubbish at this. And I could pursue it. But equally I found there was subjects I'd actually explored and understood for myself, like some of the snow gum scenes and the maritime scenes. And I knew it needed that drawing element. And oil is very much not a drawing medium. And so I deferred back to watercolour. And as you see in the space we operate here, we have Mary paints regularly in oil, I'm in watercolour, and when we go out. And I think that definition is actually healthy for two artists. So I've never felt I've lost, except watercolour struggles to go in big scale. So you get an elephant sheet or you can get a roll, but once you frame it, then you've got to look for oversized mount board and the weight of glass or perspex. So it has its size limitations, and I think there's something nice about what oil can do to wall. Its dominance is really interesting.
Sure.
I think it is the best medium.
That's oil or watercolour?
Oil. Yeah,
okay.
I think it is the real medium. I think it's the painter's medium.
Okay, great. Now, at one point in your life, you came across an oil painter who referred to watercolour as the devil's medium. Some painters speak of a rivalry that has gone on over the centuries between oil painters and watercolourists. Have you experienced any of this rivalry in your time?
In very positive ways, yeah. I think you do find that. I think, truthfully, the premise of a watercolour was usually as a preceding study to an oil paint.
Yeah.
And that's a generalisation. And over the last 50 years, it's become established as a medium of its own, and you get the Royal Watercolour Society of England, and they still continue on in some form. And so you get an awful lot of watercolour competitions around the world. There's watercolour societies. There's not oil painting societies. And so watercolour has had this lovely journey. You think about the Fabriano Festival and the Australian Watercolour Institute, and there's a number of these sort of bodies, and they're all in China was all watercolour.
Right.
But oil is this beautiful medium. And I feel like it's been labelled as past, and helpfully in some areas, but I think it needs to find its moment. There was a time when we exhibited in the Artists of the Year at the Victorian Art Society around about 2007, and Ted missed that year and I was in it, and I was the only watercolourist in it.
Okay.
And you go into it today, it'll be more likely that it's a watercolour or something under glass than an oil painting. Okay. So trends change.
Sure. I've also heard some oil painters refer to watercolour as the black arts. Have you heard that?
Yeah. I mean, I've always liked sort of, Bob Senior's a lovely classic. He's worked in oil, worked in watercolour and in oil. So each of us, Mary as an oil and me as a watercolourist, will go, you've gone to the dark side again.
Now, your workshop with Ben Winspear focused on teaching students to achieve mood in their landscapes. What would you say are some of the key points to focus on when trying to bring upon a certain mood in a landscape?
Yeah, I think you work outside, and I think you automatically soak up the mood, and I think that comes into it. And I think that might have been Ben's sort of direction, was that idea that you try to capture what you're doing outdoors. And somebody like a Joseph Zabuchvik would really say the best studio in the world is to go outdoors. I've painted outdoors, and I do like working outside, but very much in a private capacity, and we'll go into another question later about sketchbook work. But I found for me the success side of it was a bit disappointing for me, and it wasn't, my cup of tea. But in it, I think you're starting to explore that need to get mood and atmosphere in your painting. And so when you're not working outdoors or on location, then invariably you're either working from your imagination or you're working from a photograph. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with working from a photograph if you feel like you can distance a little bit and reinvent it in some form and bring a bit of an atmosphere and life to it.
Right.
But its accuracy and its detail is such a trap for a painter to record it and then measure their painting against it rather than respond to it. And anytime I've watched some of the good demonstrators working with a photo, it's almost out here on the left and it disappears.
Yeah.
And almost they then drop into it as if they can remember it rather than they can then paint it. So I think when you're doing that, you're running the risk of just doing a translation. I think when you're doing that and then doing that, then I think you're starting to activate it and make a mood or an atmosphere or a echo of it.
Right, yeah.
In the same way you would do if you were going outdoors.
Sure. Like many of us, the COVID pandemic had a great impact on your teaching. Consequently, you had to adapt to teaching online. How did you find teaching watercolour to your students through the internet?
I thought for a while that, like most people, I mean, when COVID hit, you would have been the same. You would have been out of the classroom.
Yeah.
And you were thinking, remember everyone was thought it was just going to be 2020. It was just going to be, 6 months. Then we'd all be back on deck.
Sure.
And it was pretty brutal there at one stage. I mean, I reckon when you reflected back on some of that imagery from India when they were running out of wood for burial, that was sobering. for mine, I sort of felt like, okay, I've got enough in the bank. I can just sit and have a year of painting at home. I'd actually would have liked that. But I also felt like I had students and people that were very keen to keep going on. So I found that if I set it up, and I set it up very primitively in just as an online email course, and I would take photographs of paintings and write up the steps, a bit like the old Australian Artist magazine, email it to them, give them a week or 2 weeks to work on it, send it back, and I would do a written appraisal or some adjustments and things like that. And out of it, it meant that I wasn't actually working through an art society anymore. I was working directly with the students in terms of income, and that was beneficial for both because they could get a better deal and so could I. But I also found that the results were better. There was more completion from students. They had longer to work on it, and I think it meant they never missed out. So in an art class, which is sort of a set time, if you had grandkids or if you were a dentist or whatever, you'd miss that class. And here you didn't miss anything. And if you missed one day or didn't feel up to it, there'd be another day when you'd be able to move into it and do it. So in the end, there was more completion, and with more completion, I think they got better. And it leads me to what I think is the truth about teaching, is that you can do an awful lot as a teacher, but you can't really teach people. People teach themselves.
That's right.
And you're just providing some insights and supports or helps. And I think, without being overly self-effacing, I think teachers aren't the solution in their own right. I think, it's whether you can ignite people's enthusiasm and interest in it, or
that's right,
in their own pursuits.
Sure.
So I reckon COVID wasn't the worst for me, and I like teaching in my pyjamas.
As a teacher, what keeps you inspired to continue to teach?
I think I've never ever taught the same lesson over. I always feel like I want to invent something new. So I'll work in an area like a snow scene, and I'll do it once. And even as an assignment or an online assignment or a teaching exercise, I'll do it once, and then I'll keep it, but I'll discard it. And I won't teach it again, because I'm always mindful that one of those students has already done it. And I think students love to have something a bit new. And perhaps it plays to what I want to do, is to feel like I'm developing and trying out ideas. So I felt like I've had the compliment passed in my classes from students that they feel like it's not repetitious, that there's something new.
Right.
Then again, you go to somebody like a Meldrum and they ask him, what new things do you teach each class? And he says, I don't. I teach the same thing over and over and over again. And that's probably a truth in painting. It's all paint on paper. It is all tone, form, colour, edge in one shape or form. You're just changing your subject.
Sure. Interesting. Now, moving forward, in 2011, you travelled to Europe on a painting trip. What countries did you paint in, and what did you take away from the experience?
It was Mary and I, so we just went together. So it was a painting holiday. And I think that's the lovely advantage of having two painters together. You don't mind stopping the car every 10 minutes and getting out and either photographing or painting.
Sure.
And I think we went to civilised countries. Wanted to go to England.
Yeah.
We stayed at Port Isaac, Doc Martin, and they were filming there at the time.
Okay.
We spent about a week and a half there, so we stayed entrenched in some areas.
Right.
We went to Venice, Paris, shorter visits, but at least, and principally just to paint and wander around. Very little real tourist stuff.
Right.
Just, obviously you're walking around and seeing things, but museums and the like. Art galleries obviously were always an attraction, but more so just getting out and doing the enjoyment of soaking up. I always reckon when you're travelling around Europe, you sit on a corner, Europe will pass you. You don't have to go chasing it.
Right.
Stay in one spot for a while and you'll get a bit of a feel of an area and people, and you'll get a conversation or two going as well.
What a great way to experience travelling through Europe, just with a sketchbook under your arm, and soaking in the environment.
And a little bit private in that sense, in that, and it's not a criticism people that do, but each of us preferred not to be like a Facebook. It was better to be almost like a secret visit. So I've shown people what we did afterwards, but at that stage I didn't want to do any publicity of it in any shape or form. Right. I didn't even have Facebook at that time anyway for me. But but I sometimes think that we're a little bit too immediate with what we're doing, and a little bit of secrecy is kind of kind of saucy.
Absolutely, it can help to hold on to the what you're experiencing, that vision, let it marinate a little bit.
Yes, yeah. Good point. And I think that really sums it. Yeah.
Sure. Now, I understand for the last 3 or 4 years, you have been a regular Australian representative watercolour artist at the Fabriano Watercolour Biennale International Prize in Italy. Can you provide some insight into what goes on during this event?
Yeah, look, two words, Win Vogel. So Win's an absolute gun and enthusiast up in Brisbane.
Yeah.
And I think with Anna Messina, and it came out of COVID, the idea of having an online international watercolour festival, and I think they championed it well, and it was held in Fabriano, in the town where they make the paper, but nothing to do with the paper.
Sure.
So it lost a little bit in communication. I think people thought you had to paint on Fabriano paper. But it was meant to be, and it successfully was, an international collection of artists around the world going there. Win was is such a huge driving force into it. I think I went into it once, and I thought, once is probably enough. But Win's very hard to say no to, and very enthusiastic for you, and so, and I kind of admire that sort of drive that she brings to it. And she's got her own things going on in her world as well, but hasn't dropped the ball ever.
Sure.
Win, if you're ever watching this, you do write a complex email, but it's been a good thing that's going, and that's on again later in the year. That's going up to Cairns.
Sure.
And it's always a little bit interesting to try and interpret it, but my favourite part of it, it's about half-sheet paintings, and you can paint the half-sheet in watercolour. It gets packed up flat or rolled, sent over to Fabriano, and they put them into paper frames. So something about that whole subtlety of displaying the watercolours en masse, and the way it's been solved to be able to send it around. You're not trying to send glass and mount everywhere, you're just sending the piece of paper.
Sure.
And the first one I was really pleased with was a portrait I did of Gino Cassini, who's a winemaker up in King Valley. And I sent the painting over, and they were asking if they could keep it as part of their collection, and I was pretty proud of the painting and was happy for it to be there. But equally, I wished I'd kept it, because it was a painting I would like to have passed on to the family as well.
Right.
It ended up becoming a wine label, and that's when I realised I wanted it back. Yeah.
So today, if you were to go to that particular part of the country, and purchase wine, you would see your artwork.
In Australia, in King Valley, La Cantina, and there's a fortified casino wine, Corsini wine. So,
oh wow,
it's just one of those moments that came through and stuff like that.
Sure.
But,
So with the Fabriano watercolour exhibitions, have you actually ever been, or did you send your work over?
No, I just sent my work. And there's a catalogue that's come back, and it's an absolute tomb. it's huge, and it's got so many pieces in there. They're all quite small, and you can dip into it and wade through it, and you realise, there's a heck of a lot of good watercolourists, and you can also look into it and go, there's a heck of a lot of ordinary watercolourists, but there is a lot of good painters in the world, and I think anything on the international scale alerts you to not how small you are. That's not so much the statement, but we're not an endangered species.
Right.
There is a lot of good traditional painters out there.
That's great. Now, in 2014, you travelled to your father's homeland of New Zealand to paint. How did you find New Zealand impacted your work?
Yeah, look, it was, I titled it with Mary and I, we talked about it as In Search of the Sublime. Yeah. And we went to the South Island, and New Zealand truly is a sublime country to walk around and look around and paint. And it tied with my dad passed away, and he died about 2 weeks before we set off. And Dad had sort of said to Mary, Dad was pretty insightful, he knew he wasn't going to last long, said to Mary, whatever happens, just go. And because, Mary was new on the world at that stage with me, and he was very keen for her to go and travel and see his place. Sure. And so I was there more because of the sense of family connection. I've got cousins over there, and I hooked up with a few in the South Island and caught up with them. But more, it was just a lovely opportunity to see a younger country than Australia. It's not that I've seen everything of Australia. I haven't really travelled much into the centre or anything like that, but we are an older physically older country. New Zealand, with its Alps ramping up, is a new birth country,
Sure.
and it's beautifully empty, and we'll possibly reflect on China at some stage.
Sure.
Different emotions from each of the travels in those places, but New Zealand, I think I love sandflies and the emptiness.
In 2016, you travelled to China and exhibited your work as a guest artist in Dalian. I understand China has maintained their standards and respect for traditional representational art over the years. What was your opinion of the quality of painting there, and how does it compare to Australia?
Yeah, look, I think they're really, really excellent, because a lot of students in China, they will get into an art course, and to get into an art course you have to be very good, and then they'll have a room the size of our studio, and there'll be 30 people in it. So there's competition. It's a big population, a lot of competition. Explains lots of things, perhaps, that we might sort of form opinions on. But very, very strong discipline training of observation, still life, understanding your medium, a lot of gouache work, a lot of charcoal work, very much atelier type approaches. But a lot of them actually aren't doing it for the art. They're doing it because they can transfer to other courses that make income. So I think they're using it as it's a tougher country to live in than Australia. And I don't know that we realise how easy we do have it. And that sounds like an old bloke saying it, and it is. But I think there's a lot to be thankful for in Australia, as much as we might whinge about different things in terms of opportunity and the ability to do what you might like to do, rather than do things that you don't necessarily want to do, to be able to find an opportunity to do something.
Sure.
And out of it, I was amazed to be invited to exhibit there, because I figured, well, I'm looking at their population and how well they paint.
Yeah.
They don't need me. But I think they get subsidies and money for they're a good dining and drinking culture, was what I found out. So it was sort of an interesting insight into self going there. I jumped off the plane. I was taken off the plane very early, and I was shopped around to the gallery to put the paintings in, and then straight out to lunch, and then they fed you up on rocket fuel. And I'm pretty well tired from the travel, and just about red-eyed and blottoed by 2 in the afternoon. They dropped me back into this place, and I'm thinking, okay, I can just sleep it off here. But no, they were back a couple of hours later for the evening round.
Wow.
And it was very much Gumbai. So they salute you. They're very respectful. Every one of them tag teams you and salutes you with a drink. Wow. So they're taking one. You're taking every hit under the sun. And I worked out very early that, look, this is going to really hurt me. And because I'm not a drinker.
No.
But you feel like you want to be social. And so, but what I did learn is they do a lot of American television. They do understand certain words. So when they did Gumbai, I was able to come back with off. And they understood it. But being humour and Australian humour, they bought into it. So it became a nice exit for not getting absolutely ripped every time. But it was a curious time. And my interpreter kept on disappearing. I didn't have him half the time. So it was a very much nodding and smiles, and, you can do an awful lot of communication like that. But in hindsight, I realised things about self, that I actually like being able to be in control of what I'm doing, and I like to know what I'm doing and where I'm going. So in some way, it was a very dissettling experience.
In 2017, you travelled to England and filled your sketchbook with a variety of watercolour studies and drawings featuring locations in London, Broadway and the Cotswolds, Llandano, Northern Wales, Staithes, North Yorkshire and Bath. Can you outline what your time in England was like and what you took away from your painting experience painting the English landscape?
Yeah, look, again, it was holiday with a painting partner, Mary, wife painter partner, and it was about immersion, about going into some of these places, because we'd had the experience of earlier, and our favourite holidaying was not travelling around a lot of different places, but staying into one area and trying to immerse and paint a little bit more into an area, and just not even specifically people. Restaurants, you'd go and do all the cafes and restaurants and coffee shops, but more just to paint in the morning, paint in the afternoon. It was not a driven sort of a hard sort of work. We just floated around, and if we painted, we painted. But I made the decision to only work in a sketchbook, and so I'll bring it out if that's all right.
Sure.
And over the advertising. So it was, every page was a sketchbook page. It might have been a drawing. This was at Staves, probably a really good art colony.
Lovely.
Whitby, I won't do them all. And then this one was a really nice day. This is when finally the grey disappeared and we had some nice sunshine, and that was a windswept sort of a painting day. But because they're locked away in a sketchbook, they've never pretended to be paintings.
Sure.
They were always spontaneous and alive, and Mary did lots of grouping on a canvas, so she'd sort of tape up areas and sort of work into different sections of them. I felt the secret for me was the sketchbook, because it's bound, and that one's actually been over to the royal family at one stage to be showing. Andrew Mackenzie at the Vic Arts as a historian had links there.
Wow.
So it's had some journeys. It was the one I liked taking around into workshops and just letting it float around an audience.
Right.
But it's starting to get a little bit raggedy, so I didn't want to lose it. And out of it comes an idea that, as I say, my mum's a painter, and I've got her working now doing sketchbooks for me.
Right.
And I want to eventually have my children paint, and I want them to develop their sketchbooks in time. And I want to kind of index them together and treasure chest them up, if you'd like to use a maritime analogy, and try and make a little bit of an heirloom. And I reckon I invite lots of artists to do that. Sketchbooks are a wonderful way of putting something very personal, and I think there's more chance of a sketchbook going down family lines than it is of painting. I reckon paintings might last a few generations. A sketchbook may last indefinitely because of its humbleness.
That's a great idea. Great idea, Julian. You were selected as an international artist in 2019 for Flowing Water, an international watercolour biennale in Taiwan, Taiwan. What is your opinion on the state of representational painting in Taiwan?
Yeah, look, they were open, broad-minded, but excellent painters. And that exhibition was an international collective, and it was sort of organised through David Noonan at the AWI, and I do have to remember his name. I'm sorry, I've forgotten it, but it'll come back to me.
Sure.
And Chin Lung, I think was his name. And he came to Australia, and he came down to Melbourne, and David Van Noonen asked me to sort of take him out and have a bit of a drink and say hello. And so I took him around the NGV, and we looked at the 9x5s and the like, and so that was a good experience. And then came back a reciprocating invitation to go back and exhibit with him in Taiwan. And so that was a nice sort of a international collection, and there was any number of different artists that were there.
Sure.
All worthy watercolourists to be there, and it possibly was was complimentary in that I felt my work wasn't the worst in the place, and I took that as a win. And equally, there was some excellent painters in there. So it was kind of a nice little moment of relevance as a watercolourist.
Sure.
And having done it, done now.
Right.
Tick that list and stuff. Sure. I don't have aspirations to be walking around on a world stage or anything like that, other than perhaps in maritime art. I'd like to participate in world exhibitions, but in terms of physically being in places, that's not necessarily an ambition at the moment.
Sure. Well, that's very humble of you, Julian.
No, I think it's realistic about knowing that you like your creature comforts and fires.
Sure. In 2021 and 2022, you participated in the first international online marine art exhibition featuring artists from the Australian Society of Marine Artists alongside artists from like societies in America, Canada, France and England. What an honour this must have been. Can you recall more about this experience?
Yeah, look, for me it was the moment where I decided I would take on presidency of the Australian Society of Marine Artists, because I felt like there was a purpose and it suited some of the things that I'm thinking of. Obviously, my interest is in English sea battles, And Australia didn't have any really good sea battles. And most of our maritime sailing ship history is about immigration and shipwrecks. And over on the west coast, it's, Dutch shipwrecks and the like. But I think I prefer more of the anecdotal stories and the stratagem of battles and how they were. So that's very much a European platform or field.
Sure.
So it opened the idea for me that I could actually paint as an Australian international type subjects, because they're very popular in America as well. And having participated in that exhibition, and that was set up by Stan Stefaniak, who was the original president, and Karen Bloomfield, and it was organised out of the American Society of Marine Artists.
Sure.
Same sort of ASMA initials as Australia. And they haven't gone forward with another one, but I would like to think that we taken on the presidency, got control of doing things here. That's where I'm aimed at, and I'm sort of looking to try and keep the painting standards of our society as high as I possibly can, for the purpose of presenting a high qualified professional body of painters. And it's got a mean side because it excludes some painters that are equally as enthusiastic and deserving. But I feel like it's almost like a guild-like approach that I want to take to it, because I think to really exhibit as a body of artists, that it needs that credibility that you can match them for their painting. And we have some really excellent marine artists in Australia.
Sure. Now, moving forward, Julian, you're known for painting ships and naval battles. What is it that essentially draws you to the genre of maritime painting?
Yeah, Gunsmoke. Look, I love the storylines. When you read sort of about Admiral Duncan quelling a mutiny out on the North Sea by holding the renegade over the edge of his ship and saying, look, you've got a choice. You can stay here and fight with me, or you can swim back to England for the mutiny. And, that's a bit of an historical footnote in there if you ever explore it. That sort of stuff I really enjoy, because it's sort of fantasy, but it's based on reality, on truth.
Yeah.
And I think then sort of the wider reading is that history is littered with fantastic moments that one person will read and pass over, another person will read and they'll get an idea, a visual idea out of it. And that's what ignites me. So before I do any sort of a sea battle or a scene, I tend to have all the books I can find that have any reference to it, or I Wikipedia it, or whatever I can do to find out any sort of angle or anecdote that then sort of makes it feel that I'm painting something very specifically that needs to be painted. Because you think about history and how many artists have been, you're always looking for something you feel like no one has ever painted it from that angle.
Sure.
So that's kind of the interest. And the Gunsmoke is just back to mood and atmosphere.
Right. Well, you do a lovely job of representing that Gunsmoke.
Thank you.
Now, the terms marine and maritime are often used interchangeably in art. Can you explain the differences between them?
Yeah, I can try to, and I'll be starting arguments at the same time, because there is no definitive. I think it depends on where you are in the world. I think there's different views, and it depends a little bit on what your personal idea of it is too. It isn't defined, but marine I see as being painting of ships on the sea. And marine is a term that first came about with the Van der Veldes, who were around about the mid-1600s painting the Dutch-English wars. And they were referred to as the marine artists, not the maritime artists. So it wasn't about the maritime history, it was more about the marine subject.
Right.
So marine loosely refers to in the sea, maritime by the sea, for want of a label. And the moment you do that and do your research, you'll find marine parks on land and you'll find maritime events on the sea. So you'll find the terms really do. Both of them need salt or seawater involved in it. But I like to think marine is the true. You would think maritime would be the ship painting link. I think it's more maritime history, but it's marine painting.
Marine painting. Interesting. Through your many years working as a book illustrator, You have adopted an ability to create a strong sense of narrative in your work. In your own words, you have stated, quote, "I like painting in a traditional style where realism and ability are manifested into the works. I like the concepts of my own painting being one of the continuation of traditional painting rather than the need to be different and contemporary for the sake of it. I have found satisfaction in painting the scenes and subjects that appeal to me, and from time to time, marine sea battles for the historical narration and interest. When I set up a marine painting, it often starts with a read and research of the event. Lots of books and ship drafts occupy my studio space, gradually falling away as the drawing starts to give way to the painting," unquote. Can you elaborate more on the research that is involved when preparing to paint a ship battle scene?
Yeah, look, it's an unknown. You know how people on radio have to believe there's an audience out there. Mm-hmm. And when you read your books, I don't know what I don't know, right, to use the Yes Minister type language. But you paint the best you can and you research the best you can. And having not been a sailor in those times and a sailor today, and sailing today isn't necessarily the same as sailing in the past anyway. You know, lots more ropes in the past and no engines to help, all manpower pulling on, you know, ropes and like. So I think researching it is kind of the lineage thing that I like to feel like. I'm a cog passing on marine stories and ideas of what ships looked like onto possibly another person or another family, or nothing grand, but it's moving it along. So I feel honour bound to try and make them as good as I can, and rather than feel like I develop a style that disguises or contemporises it too much or abstracts it down, I would rather be painting into more of the illustration, understanding it, so that you could look at one of my paintings and have an idea of, yep, that's probably where the boat went, and that's how many guns it had, and that's where, you know, that mast came down in a sea battle, and that bit, you know, happened, and that ship was next to that ship. That is all important to me. Immaterial, because when you look at them, most people wouldn't be able to tell one sea battle from another, understandably, but it is a point of honour that you try and do it for yourself. And then when you do meet people that have an understanding of it, they can embrace on that one, so they'll see a language underneath the veneer of a sea battle painting. The difficulty is there's so many things I don't know. There was a painting I did called Lavenga Sinks, and it came out of the French accounts, which really grandiose the moment, and it was, you know, Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon, ever strong on land, copped absolute hidings at sea. Yeah. But this battle was early on the Napoleonic War or in the Revolutionary Wars, and this ship went down pretty nobly. And there was no need to ever build it up, but they really built it up that it took about 4 or 5 English ships with it and went down with all flags flying and all this. So I painted it as a little bit more like the Titanic film, a lot of drama where the bow was up out of the air and it was sinking by the stern, because most people had done it the other way. I just wanted to do a slightly different version or interpretation, because no one really knows. Now, a ship, when it sinks, it probably just gets waterlogged, loses buoyancy and goes under. So it probably really just goes down pretty calmly. But I wanted to echo the French drama of it and nobility. And then I posted it into all the Facebook marine groups that I could, and I invited criticism of it. And it was fantastic, because it was a 50-50 count on it. So some people were giving arguments as to how it would be, you know, if the magazine exploded early and then the back was blown off and all the guns had sort of shifted down and the weight would, and, you know, they had reasons for why it could do what it did. And others said it would never possibly have done that. So that kind of animated debate. And you can tell I was really enthused by that moment into it. And for me, that was a nice moment to be a painter of what I'm doing, because it felt like I was putting something up that wasn't criticised for being a painting, it was more debated. So it did more what I like to think paintings can do, and that is provide conversations.
Sure. Very good. Now, with your landscapes, I understand you prefer to travel north of your home in Epping towards the country rather than south towards the city. It is in the quiet serenity of the countryside that makes a large part of your body of work. Regarding finding a subject to paint, you state, quote, "When we have decided on a subject and we have our painting language sorted, the remainder is to engage the artist in us and paint an original work with its own me today in it. Clear the head and paint the painting exactly as we want it to be done, drawing on any encouraging influences and ignoring the judgmental," unquote. In your mind, what does an ideal landscape composition include?
Yeah, I reckon that's a question you could ask every few years and you'd get different answers from, because I think that's the development of it. Right at the moment, I'm actually more interested in simplification, not in terms of abstracting the paint down, but in the design of the landscape and perhaps exploring smaller elements in bigger spatial areas and distance.
Right.
And for that reason, that's why I prefer to go into the quieter areas north. And I think, central Victoria is a beautifully attractive area to paint. And it's right at my back doorstep. And I don't find the city comfortable to hang around and stand still in and draw or paint into it. And I don't really want to just go down and photograph, because they invariably become very illustrative paintings.
Yes. Yeah.
And I do them from time to time, not nearly as much anymore. And again, a bit like the narrative in ships and things, I don't want to just fake it with just a bland sort of a mark for a building. I'd want to put the windows in and the detailing of balustrades and things like. I'd want to do that. I think secondly, Melbourne's not as pretty as it once might have been to paint. But I'll stand by, other painters that actually can make it look a lot better than it really is too, and I admire their work. But I like to think that you go forward and you're doing two things. If you're going outdoors, you're responding to what you're seeing, because what's the point in going outdoors otherwise? But at the same time, you're also engineering your look of what you want to try and achieve and do. And I don't think any painter would go out and start painting without having a slightly preconceived idea of what they would like to do, whether it's inspired by another painter or a reference they've seen or something like that.
Right.
And so you might go searching for it. In New Zealand, we were searching for the sublime out on our own back doorstep. I think we're just searching for, shade and a warm moment.
Sure.
But then try and find a reasonable scene into it.
Right.
Prior to that, I was actually looking for more complexity in the paintings. So I was looking for very sort of intricate gum trees or gnarlings and things like that. And the snow gums in that sort of field is very much about trying to find the twisted humanity in trees, if you'd like.
Right.
So that's a different sort of a source.
Now, being a landscape painter, predominantly Julian painting the maritime scenes as well, spending that time out in the landscape and looking at the land and how it was created, what does that point to you? Does it point to a creator? Does it point to science? What's your take on that?
I think there's a certain joy, and it probably comes back to that little bit about watercolour painting and what it does and unexpected. And so I like process. So I like the feeling that you're out there and you're wrestling with the paint drying. And it's not that I do a lot of outdoor work. I've done more than enough.
Right.
But I do a lot of studio work, and I'd never shy from saying that. But I do like going outdoors. And if I'm out there, I think it's the kind of the personal wrestle, or it's the camaraderie. And so there's nothing nicer than when you've got a number of people and you can hear the clacking of brushes, or, the mixing of a brush being cleaned in terps, or, the "oh, damn it" sort of comment from someone.
Sure.
So that community is kind of nice, and it's a lovely, it's pretty cheap entertainment to go out with someone to just go and set up your easels and splash, $50 as Michael Harding paint or something. But I think it is that moment. It's the time, and the result isn't nearly as important as the moment than the process of putting the paint in there and being there.
Sure.
And I think most painters would every painter I reckon would say, if they're showing a painting they did outdoors, they can pretty much remember what was around.
Right.
My favourite one was Mary and I were in Tassie, and we came to a reasonable hill. We'd been driving around looking for a scene. We found a reasonable hill, and we pulled over, and it was dirt, it was quiet, had a vista and a distance. We set up, Mary painted one way, I painted the other. And it's only when you're setting up that you start to settle into the environs. And I took a deep whiff and realised I'd locked in on a painting. I'd sort of decided on the scene. I was well into it. And then it wasn't close, but it was near enough that when the wind wafted, the dead wombat down the road. And so I'm trying to create this lovely ambience. So a little bit about what you're saying about the spirituality of it, or the creativity side of it, was possibly affected by the wombat. So when I look at the painting, I can't do anything but smell the wombat.
That's interesting. Now, what's interesting as well, Julian, is you spend a great deal of time working with marine and maritime subjects, but you've referred to yourself as a armchair sailor.
Yeah. Look, I think you meet some painters. I've got a mate of mine, Peter Sharp, and he's a genuine sailor, and he goes out and he'll sort of talk about the wind shift in the water and the understanding of the roll of the wave and the lean of the yawl, and you think I know some of the terms, he knows them all. And mine is really, I've sat in the comfort of my chair and read a book, and that's what I could refer to as an armchair sailor. My one moment came when I was invited to help sail a 30-foot yacht around from Port Phillip Bay to Eden.
Okay.
And so I embarked on the voyage with visions of not being an armchair sailor, but I'd sit there and tie myself to the mast and paint things as I went along. And we had a crew of 4, and we had a good strict captain, which was probably good. And we got down to Wilson's Prom, and I'd had ideals of passing the lighthouse and painting from the boat at the end of the lighthouse, because Port Phillip, Wilson's Prom lighthouse is a hard one to get to, but it was a moment. But he'd done his calculations as to when he wanted to be around Point Hicks, which is right on the pointy bit of Victoria, which meant we had to leave at 1 a.m.
Oh, wow.
And surprisingly, it's dark in them that time, so very little painting of the lighthouse to be done. And then once we hit the swell, one of our crew member went down seasick, so we only had 3, and we had a rule that we had to have 2 in the cockpit at any one time, because we're out in Bass Strait, which meant you only had time for rest. Very little painting. I do a lot more painting in my armchair, I found out.
Sure. Now, you do paint on plein air, but also finish more elaborate landscapes in your studio. You have explained that sometimes your plein air paintings don't turn out as successful as your studio paintings. Why is this so?
I probably practice and approach, and probably if you applied yourself you could learn to develop it and you'd do it better. I feel like sometimes what happens is, as a painter that becomes very strong outdoors, is that you gain control of how you want to approach your painting. So rather than just responding to the environment, you're almost bringing yourself to it and painting the painting you want it to be, and you are reflecting and you are gaining so much from it. It's not meant as any sort of form of criticism, but I think you become very good at it. But I sometimes feel like, for me, I'd be feeling a little bit insincere with it, and so I'd rather go with sketchbook and process in the moment and enjoy that time, and then come back and then really design it as a painting. The other one I've decided in the end is that I'm less interested in painting specific spaces or places in around Victoria. I prefer to almost think of it as a whole. And so a lot of my current landscape work, when I do it, is more about techniques and how I'm painting in response to the medium, a bit like, the demo today with the response to the water and you're designing it, but you're letting it do its thing as well. And in the landscape, I like the idea that you can move trees or add trees or not put them in, and you're not actually working to a preset in any way. You're responding to your medium and creating a picture, and then you're starting to design compositionally. And it runs a risk. It runs the risk of becoming very twee and slick or formulaic. There's a lot of possibilities where it can go.
Sure.
I'm lucky. I'm a lazy painter. I don't paint that much all the time, so that means I don't overdo those sorts of things and become too slick with it, I think. And I tend to shift around. So I'll then move back to maritime or portraiture or somewhere else. So you move your genres around, can keep you refreshed with your painting and not sort of too settled in what you're doing and how you're doing it.
That's a good strategy, sure. Regarding your watercolour process, sometimes you begin with an elaborate underdrawing in pencil, and other times you begin drawing directly with a rigger. which you hold loosely to create quick, long strokes to establish the composition. You value fine draftsmanship, but you enjoy the less strict, spontaneous nature of the watercolor medium, as you state, quote, "My paintings are a balance of drawn detail with watercolor washes and an array of interferences and textures like rubs, splatters, scratches, terps, salt, bombs, and breadcrumbs," unquote. How do you determine the best way to start one of your watercolor paintings?
So you can see I'm still wrestling with being an illustrator and a painter in that sort of commentary.
Sure.
And there are times when it's just lovely to render and build the pencil up and you don't want to give it away. So in the demo, I actually was really enjoying the pencil render. You probably saw it as I was working. You go, "Yep, he's never going to get out of there." And other times you want to be into the paint and you've got a whole different sort of a mindset. And how do you decide on that? I don't know that you may have a subject that demands a good drawing and you have a vision in mind that requires it, and in that case I'll just really immerse into it. And other times you can go, look, it's very unimportant, all the drawing is just going to be lost in all the drawing is going to be lost in flow and painting with your techniques. And so you can focus sometimes more on the medium and its irreverence and its excitement and its fun, and that happens in demonstrations. So you don't have any time to do a drawing in a demonstration generally. So if you're up there at Camberwell or somewhere doing it, you really want to be launching into the painting. So in those contexts, again in the demonstration, I'm always aware of my thirds and quarters and centre.
Yes.
And you can often then have a very free-flowing painting that has a quiet referencing to a composition in mind.
Sure.
And it might be as simple as to bring this bank of trees right to the centre and bring this cut of water back to the three-quarters, keep it above the half. And so you've got a set of disciplines, but it doesn't show in the painting specifically unless you overdo the construct of it. But there's a sort of, it's not a good analogy, but I use it as sometimes you paint quite sober and sometimes you're quite drunk.
Yeah, right. Interesting. There are a variety of techniques you utilise when painting with watercolour, some of which include allowing beads of water to run down the page to clean up a space in the scene for tree branches, running the ferrule of the brush along a ruler to achieve very fine lines on the sails of a ship, using breadcrumbs and scoring with a scalpel to add textual interest to your work, and spraying mists onto your paintings to create the illusion of gunfire. During your demonstrations, you have a tremendous ability of working the watercolour and to make the paint do what you want. These tricks of the trade can really only be learnt through years of brush mileage and understanding the physical properties of watercolour, how it flows, brush drag, how different pigments react, the amount of water to use, and allowing for drying time. In fact, drying time is very important in watercolour painting. The timing has to be just right, or it can be detrimental to the outcome of the painting. Can you reveal more of the tricks of the trade you have learnt over the many years you have painted in the watercolour medium?
I reckon you look for painters that are generous. So Alan Rawati, really generous with what his knowledge. He would be the painter I would say has such a depth of understanding of the watercolour medium, the properties of what it can do, what happens when you mix it with alcohols or with inks and the like. So he has real good knowledge, and he's such a generous person to have a chat to. Other people are a bit secretive about stuff. I'm not sure why, but they are. None of the things we're doing with watercolour are new. Everything's been done at some stage by someone somewhere, and often they're written up, so you can sort of do your historical research. I think sometimes we've had a 50-year plan of pure watercolour, wet in wet, impressionistic, tonal, that side of it. And if you predate that and if you go back further and you go to Bouvelot's and the like, or Blair Mere Young's or some of these other artists, there's likelihood that there was a little bit of a commercial aspect to what they were doing, and there was tricks and sort of things that they were doing in their painting that are written up. I found breadcrumbs came out of a Illumination was a Illumination? I think it was Illumination. Illumination, I think, was the name of the exhibition. And it was a watercolour retrospective at the NGV, which went for 100 years. And it was a kind of interesting exhibition. It went through more older traditional, and then it gets to about the 50s and it becomes a very modernist and abstract one. And you can almost see your audience do that. They would fan out into two sides depending on their persuasion. But in that one, there was one of the curators wrote about the experimentation with breadcrumbs, and it might have come out of using bread as a bit of a mop, but I suspect they were putting breadcrumbs in because it really works quite effectively. So it's not a new discovery, it's just you see a word and you think, oh, well, I'll give it a try. So in my experimentation, when I'm teaching, one of the subjects I like to try and take students into is called biomorphism, and if you look up the term, you'll find a guy called Walls, who was part of the Bauhaus movement before Hitler came in. Of course, he was a deviant artist, so out he went. But he was doing sort of impressionistic work where he'd just do a splodge or a daub of something with the back of his hand or a sponge or something, and then just work into it using every possibility, a way of using a brush, any ideas that came into mind. And that's a really freeing sort of an area. It has a bit of a trippy, abstracty, free-flowing sort of an aspect, which, you know, in some ways I would be a little bit disparaging of, but in terms of getting confidence and understanding your medium and seeing what it can do, it's a lovely, free and trippy and easy way of doing it. And you learn stuff, because you'll find, you know, even any realistic painting is just full of abstract moments.
Sure, well said. How do you use sprayed mist to represent gunfire? Is an airbrush involved?
I have got an airbrush, and that's only a recent addition, but that isn't how I've been doing it.
Okay.
And what it is sometimes I would paint the ship in its entirety, and then you'd sacrifice. And it's a dangerous thing to do. You have to wreck a lot of paintings before it starts to work. And it's spraying in water with a very fine perfume mister or something like that, and then letting it settle and timing it to bring in white gouache over it. And then staining the gouache a little bit as well if you need to warm it up or cool it down, and just letting it do what watercolour does and fogs out. But I found that was the way I discovered or liked it, and there was something about that process at the end of a painting where you take what would become fairly illustrative or static subject, and then just start to build the atmosphere it's almost like, you know, dry ice drifting through a stage. It's exactly the same sort of thing. It adds that little bit of drama and fun into it. Possibly a better way is to be a better watercolourist and just actually save it as wet in wet from the very beginning. So Derek Gardner does that so beautifully. I'll never be a good watercolourist.
Now, you favour using mines to create a certain visual effect in your paintings. For those who may be unaware, can you explain exactly what mines are?
Yeah, look, I reckon it's my term. I think I've come up with it. And basically it's... You can get sort of cards which have little spots or pimples of colour on them that you can sort of, in Daniel Smith or something, and wet them and see what colour they are. And so what happens is any job of dried watercolour paint, when water is added, will blow up. So I like to sometimes prepare a painting for demonstration and put in with a very fine rigger or a dagger brush, dip it into the top of the tube so it becomes a little bit elasticized, and then take that elasticized daub, almost like toothpaste coming out, and just let it be pulled off the brush. So as the brush touches the page, the texture of the paper will hold it, and brush will pull out, and you'll be left with just this small, interesting blob of paint. And then you let it dry for a week if you need to, a year, wouldn't matter how long. And then when you paint along, you'll be putting down a beautiful wash, and suddenly it'll just blow up. And it's that little bit of imperfection. It happens more naturally when you're mixing quickly, and you put your brush into a bit of paint and you don't clean out the brush and water it down, and then you put it on and you get that little nugget of paint. And I find those, whenever I see them, I think they're beautiful. And so that's what a mine is for mine.
Can you explain cauliflowers and how to avoid them in the watercolour painting process?
Yeah, I reckon it's interesting, that one. Joseph Zabuchvik was talking about that, and he said, don't try to avoid them, because what will happen is, as you paint more and more, you won't be able to make them happen. And what it is your instinctive timing will come into it, and cauliflower blooms are generally an indication that you've, because it's all based on water tension, you've just been a bit slow while area's drying to come back for the next wash. And watercolours work really, really wet in wet, and they work really well as glazes or dries on it. But in the middle, they're a bit temperamental.
Okay.
I sometimes say they're like teenage kids. Can't do anything with them in the middle. You've got to wait. Get them while they're young or get them when they're later. Ignore the middle.
Right.
But the cauliflower blooms in the right place, and that's, that water tension where it's pushing through, can actually be really quite beautiful. And other times in your clouds, they may not be what you want.
Sure.
But I think as you paint more and more, you don't get them.
Right.
And you're not sure why. It's just you paint quicker, more effectively, efficiently.
Sure. Many watercolorists use salt or sugar to add texture to their paintings. However, you prefer breadcrumbs. Why is this the case? Now, you've spoken about breadcrumbs somewhat.
So let me go to salt. I think salt very much is a corrosive addition, and I think it's probably a curatorial nightmare down the track. But it does a really good effect, and people really can work it quite beautifully. But I found I had a painting that had a snow gum. I used salt in the rock, and I left it in the car at an exhibition while I was unloading, and the sun got onto it, and straight away the moisture fogged up underneath the glass, and it cleared when it went into the gallery. But it's an indication that it actually will absorb the moisture and hold the moisture in the page. So I think it's a danger to it. And, that's not a reason not to do it. You just have to be aware what it does. Sugar was fun. We did that once when we didn't have any breadcrumbs. We're working through the larder. We haven't tried couscous yet, but we're working through. And the only joy about sugar is that you can put your hand on it and you can pick your painting up. So it really can become quite sticky. But it's got its own sort of things. It's not one I've done a lot of.
Sure.
But I think, all of those sort of additions, sawdust, dirt, sand, anything like that are all sort of fun textural things. More and more it's becoming important as we were sort of alluding to AI and where things will be. The proof of the painter being on the page. That's why I like to do scratches with my nail. They're marks that are really hard to fake. They're a spontaneous moment. They're good things in paintings.
Sure. To add textual interest to your work, I understand you scrape back certain information in a painting. Can you explain how this is done in more detail? Now, during the demonstration, using your nail to scrape back. And you did mention that you do purposefully grow out your nails, so you've got an area which you can use to scratch with. But you also use things like scalpels as well.
I think scratching back into the white of the paper is a really good one, so you can actually get very fine detail. OH&S, leave your glasses on, protect your eyes in case of breakage, all that sort of stuff we've done in classes. But the other one was Xian Yu is a Chinese painter that's in Melbourne, and he and I painted at Montserrat at one stage, and he had no English and I had no Chinese, and we were painting together without an interpreter. And I looked over and he was scoring away with his knife, and I sort of went over, no, it's good. It's a good painting. Don't wreck it. and he just loved this knife scoring, and he tended to do it all over. It was almost like and it's just a burnishing effect. And I kind of got excited about the idea. That's actually really cool. And I like to use it in, we're talking a bit about spirituality in painting and kind of that sense that there's something else going on in it. And for me, I like to do it. There was a painting I did as a demo where I kind of understood why I was doing it. It felt like it's almost like ghosts moving through, if you want to go into that sort of way of thinking it. But it implies atmosphere or movement or tracking of spirit, whatever you want to try and do. But the marks themselves always raise interest, and they're the sort of things in an exhibition. People come along and they'll see it, and they'll ask you about it, the why and the how, but they're generally attracted to it, not unattracted to it, is how I would view it. So it's those sort of touches. Again, that brings back to, in this time when we're doing a lot of Facebooking and a lot of international, online digital exhibitions, that whole idea of putting tangibility into the paper so that you actually recognise that the person has seen the painting, the real painting. And the other one I do is little pyrrole orange dots now and then for the same reason. They don't photograph. You don't know them from the photograph. You only know them if you've seen them. And I kind of like that coding, if you'd like, coming through because it gives a genuineness to the people that have seen your painting.
Sure.
Paintings are really fascinating. You know, the painter produces them and a viewer comes along. At some point, the ownership of the painting shifts, not necessarily in terms of buying. Somewhere the painter is just the painter and the viewer is the one that's been really soaking up and enjoying it. And so you see that sort of journey in for the painter and it comes back out for the viewer.
Sure.
And there's something nice in that one, I reckon.
It is, it's true. Now, regarding your ship paintings, you have explained that painting the sea around the ships is the real difficulty, but it can look very pleasing when the water is flowing around the wooden walls of the ship. You go on to state, quote, "There is something quite emotive when the wooden hull of a ship meets the curling wave, all drifting in a cloud of smoke from the gunfire," unquote. To represent water accurately, have you spent much time studying the anatomy of waves?
Yeah, and I have. And every time I do, it looks really stilted and laboured.
Okay.
And I think what it is it's probably going back to emotional response. I think when you try to do a wave and it becomes still, because you're working this tone and that shape and then you're connecting it up to the next, it becomes a very static paint process at times. And I think being a free-flowing element, a little bit like clouds, if you try to paint exact clouding rather than just enjoy the wetting wets and saving some whites and putting some greys in and things, and I think water's exactly the same. The more you try to paint it with a reference, the less alive it feels. And the risk is when you paint it too freely, only you might understand it.
Sure.
And so you run a risk with it. It's a really difficult element to paint. And I would say that most of my seas in battle scenes or in boat scenes work more effectively because I've got elements that are working with them that carry it rather than I'm a particularly good painter of the sea. Sure. And yet there are some really beautiful painters of the sea out there.
Sure.
Magic.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's definitely a very challenging subject to paint. Water,
it is,
isn't
yeah.
it? You encourage your students to leave the finer detail, painstaking work for the evening and to focus on the broad coloured areas during the day when the light is still good. Can you explain more about this strategy of working?
I think it's just that colour in daylight is far better than at night time.
Of course, yeah.
And ironically, the studio at the Vic Arts has no natural lighting. So all my teaching there has been done under artificial light. And it's a reason why I've never really worried too much about developing an absolute colour understanding because it could never work unless it's out in real daylight or proper lighting is a shallow answer on it.
Right.
But I think sorry, I've lost the question now. But
so you're working during the day.
Yeah, and so the
areas.
And I think the other side of it would be pretending that I actually work very hard, and that's probably a pretense. And it would be that if you were utilising your time, I would probably draw at night and set up my drawing for the next day to be up early and paint for the full time, and then set up and draw the next night to do it. So it'd be a way of extending your day rather than draw in the morning and then paint and then find you're putting your finishing work or colours at the end. Do I do that? No, not a chance. I go and watch the telly.
I understand the watercolour process can force you to embrace your mistakes and work intuitively to turn a negative into a positive. As you've explained, quote, "You shouldn't be surprised by the unexpected things that happen when you paint in watercolour, and artists who don't enjoy surprises should choose a different medium," unquote. Can you explain more about this attitude of embracing your mistakes in watercolour painting and why it's important?
Yeah, I think if you view the different mediums, so oil, pastel, acrylic to most extent, when you put the mark down, it stays exactly the same. And watercolour, you put the mark down and then you get quite a surprise when it's changed 5 minutes later. It changes physically, it might spread, it might balloon, it might fade. It definitely fades in value, and it might change its colour. It can split. So as a medium, it's very unstable as it goes onto the page, and you really don't know what you've got until 5 to 10 minutes later, and even later on than that. And, the worst thing you can ever do is have a fantastic wash and then walk away, because you can come back and go, where did that come from? It might be a leak from the tape, comes right back up and balloons up, and it can go prodigious lengths. These are also the personality of the paint, or the characteristics that make it attractive to work with. And so it's a yin-yang, or you've got to win some and lose some sort of attitude.
Sure.
And I kind of like the idea that if it trips you up, it's a humbling exercise, because, you think you're in control of it, and then it says, no, you're not. But I think that is why you have to embrace that and work with it, and even engineer it to a certain extent. So in a lot of my painting, you'll see I'll deliberately, do a little bit of a splatter, or an errant scratch, or we had a smudge. You can clean them out. There's things you can do, but never panic about them. And if they come out, they come out. If they don't, enjoy them and love them, because they're going to be there forever. And if you really don't like it, do it again.
Sure.
I'm a very cruel teacher when students come to me and say, what should I do with the painting next? And I say, well, you should paint it to the same level, and then take the one that you like the least and develop that, so that you actually don't go backwards.
Sure.
You end up going forward, because at least you've got a second piece, and the first one still might be the better one, but then that allows you a room to experiment.
Sure. So would you say watercolour is not a very good medium for a perfectionist?
Except that it has that beautiful drawing side, and if you think about some of the perfectionist painters like John Sell Cotman, and so used in a different manner, it can actually be beautiful. You can actually just work very, very small marks. I haven't shown it very much, but there's a painting style with watercolour I do like, and that's almost like a pointillist way, and you just keep putting in small marks, which are always absolutely controlled, and then you just build it up, and its layering content, or ability to layer up, means that you might get 10 visits to one area.
Wow.
And find an absolute solution out of it that way.
Sure.
And that's almost like just in and out.
Yeah.
And you can actually get very highly detailed portraiture work that way, is how I've sometimes worked it as well. It doesn't all have to be horizontal brush work. It can be in and out work, and that's a very controlled delivery.
So almost stippling with your
exactly
brush.
Yeah. Daubing, stippling,
Sure. Regarding your palette, you tend to keep your favourite colours, which you refer to as your friends, close to the centre of the palette, and the other colours which you aren't so reliant on are usually placed on the outer edge of the palette. Warm colours stay on one side and cool colours on the other. Your favourite colour is a particular grey, which you term grunge or killed colour, which is essentially a mixture of the residual colours left on your palette from previous painting sessions. Your palette consists of cadmium red, cadmium yellow, cadmium orange, raw sienna, burnt sienna, raw umber, alizarin crimson, Windsor violet, French ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, cerulean blue, and cobalt turquoise. Have you found that your palette has changed much over the years?
Yeah, I think it does. I think probably I'm looking at the gouache as an addition that I didn't have on the palette, and Tassie Blue's got a bit of a gouache into it. It's got a lovely powdery colouring into it. Cobalt turquoise light, shadow violet. Some of these come into it, and there's always new colours coming on. And you go into art shops. I'm a big proponent of go into your art shop and talk to the people that run it. And I bang on about seniors art, but they are a genuine sort of a family concern that have an interest in retailing paint.
Sure.
And when you go in there, you just ask them, and they'll say, "Have you tried?" And it might be Moonglow or anything like that, and then you'll go around the traps, and everybody's telling you, "Have you tried Moonglow?" And you feel embarrassed if you haven't.
Sure.
And I think Moonglow's great, but overrated. But anyway, there's a colour to explore, and I think you you're mad not to try things because it just might be the right colour you need for a moment. Like I think in the demo I was struggling a little bit on a tone for the sail, on the shady side of the sail, and you may find a colour in the tube. You're always better to try and mix it as well.
Sure.
But I think advice into that one. Ben Winspear does a really good exercise. I did it in watercolour with the students, and that is basically you divide up a panel in 12 squares by 20, and they're each a ½ inch, and you do it times 4, and you just go in and fill the squares in with a colour. It doesn't matter what you're doing, you just mix them. You know, you've got 240 squares, you're doing 1,000 squares. So long as you mix one clearly and cleanly every time, don't just take the colour you're doing, wipe it off, start again, wipe it off, start again. That gives you 1,000 explorations to explore your palette. And then at the end of it, you go with your colour wheel and you start to look at what colours are you not finding, what colours are you ignoring. So in mine it was a more iridescent green, and it was a coral.
Right.
And you know, you think about a floral painter, they're really interested in those sort of colours. So I went and bought tubes of that, so I've got them. They're not ones I'm necessarily using, they don't come up in a sea battle very often, but it is good to know what your range is and that there isn't any colours that you can't get an approximation of. You know, obviously real colour is different to paint colour.
Sure.
But you can usually find what your shortfalls are in your palette.
Right.
So I found that palette for me works pretty well, but I need sort of corals and some iridescent greens from time to time.
Right.
Your lemon yellow, you know, you just can't get an intense sunlit green without maybe a lemon yellow in it.
Interesting.
Because it's sort of probably a cleaner green, blue, yellow, rather than any red in it to warm it up like a Hansa yellow or a cad yellow.
Sure. And with gouache, Julian, some watercolourists are for it and some are against it.
Yeah. And for mine, what I do is I slaver it on and I provoke with it, and you're kind of thinking, well, you know, it's your painting and it's your life and you live and die on it and you'll get criticised for it perhaps. But if you do, you've got centuries on your side of people that have worked with gouache.
Right.
And I feel like, you know, England's got it sold, haven't they? They have an exhibition and they call it watercolour and pure watercolour. And so pure watercolour doesn't have any of that sort of opaque sort of paint into it. But my paint experience, and yeah, it's short, but my paint experience shows that I think sometimes the addition of gouache, particularly in background hills, creates a more of a glowing look than just watering down a blue for a background hill, as a for instance.
Yes.
And when I'm demoing, I lay it on and I'm sort of saying, well, look, you know, I'll take a hit for you. I'll show you what it does in mine, and then you can come and look at it and you can make your own decision. But I don't like the idea that people make these edicts and puritanical demands that you should never do that. And I think the moment you hear you shouldn't, you should.
It seems that you sometimes conceptualise your light source to emphasise drama in your paintings. Would you agree?
Yeah. I mean, you can't help but look at a 40s film. You know, Humphrey Bogart, Casablanca, In the Shadows, Ingrid Bergman somewhere. And those tonal qualities create that lovely drama. And I think it is one of those key areas in a painting is the contrast creates interest, whereas flat colouring. And I think that's sometimes where painters lose their way, is they lose their tone. So, you know, in the demo today, the little black and white study was important for the first ignition of an idea.
Right.
And so sometimes holding your tone. We don't do perhaps enough painting in black and white, in neutral tint, taking all the colour out of the game and just making things work as a tone and a value.
Sure. Perhaps one of your most ambitious sea battle paintings you have created to date was the one featured in the Maritime exhibition at the Victorian Artists Society in 2018. The painting is titled The Battle off Cape Trafalgar, 1805. Can you recall the experience of creating this painting?
Yeah, look, any maritime artist is going to tell you that's the epic, that's the big one, that's what we all want to paint. And 1805, obviously 2005 was 200 years on from it, so there was a lot of them over in England being produced, and mine came later because I didn't get around to it till a bit later, but I think it's the one that everyone wants to paint. It's the most documented. It was a a defining battle in terms of the Napoleonic War, strategies, all manner of things. When you look at Nelson as an admiral and the battles he fought in, and then you compare it through history, he's like the Bradman in cricket, if that analogy makes sense to anyone. He really was out there ahead of the other admirals in terms of results on the sea, if you like. So Trafalgar's just one of those ones that everybody can relate to. You can paint a Battle of Trafalgar scene, and once you've got it, there's an awful lot of people that have read and understood it can pick where you are in it, but you can do sort of Cape St Vincent or Camperdown and they won't have a clue where you are in it. So it's the most understood one, so it's a good measurable sea battle.
Right. Now, another ambitious ship painting of yours is Le Vengeur Sinks, which features a French 74-gun Le Vengeur sinking after a major cannonade with the British 74-gun Brunswick at the glorious 1st of June in 1794. This painting was the winner of the Victorian Artists Society Maritime Award in 2022. I understand many maritime artists have attempted to paint this sea battle in the past. Your version indeed exemplifies your mastery of pictorial design. Can you provide some insight into the process of painting it?
That was the one we were talking about a bit earlier, where we're talking a bit about reading up the French accounts versus the English accounts and stuff. So perhaps if that's still in the cut that we've done, what I would probably come back to is that the Vix has a maritime exhibition that started out as a bit of a filler. Yeah. And there was a guy called Graham Harper found this dreadful trophy in a shop. Right. And we called it the Thomas Summerscales Trophy. And Thomas Summerscales is one of the great maritime painters, if ever you look him up. You know, Valparaiso in South America, and then he went to England and killed it in the Royal Academy. Right. And so we had that. And so there's this trophy at the Vix, which has got a really good set of good names on it, not mine specifically, but lots of really good names on it. That is the unofficial, because it's a dog of an award, in terms of the ship trophy, and it's a perpetual trophy, so no one ever gets to keep it. You only get to have won it, and it was kind of one that I was really wanted to win at some stage because of its history. And like Graham Harper was a lovely guy on committee, and I'm not sure if he's still with us or not, but he at that time he was just so alive with the trophy and the idea. So that's probably more of interest in that whole one, as to where that painting and what it related to and why it came about. Right, interesting. Compositionally, you favour the work of the European masters and their use of diagonal lines and rule of thirds. However, your technical influences extend further than the masters by looking at Walt Disney and how he would often highlight the lighter focal areas by darkening the surrounding tones. I understand you admire the early works of Blamire Young, J.J. Hilda, and Harold Herbert for their reputation and place in history, as well as for their painting technique. Who are some other artists that you look to when trying to resolve pictorial problems? I think what I like to try and do is skip away from current artists so that you're not feeling like you're stepping on their toes or echoing. And there's certain scenes like Joseph's The Woodchwick's a real influence to me because I just admired how he approaches his work. And there's painting scenes that you're just itching to paint, and there's one I did paint, and the whole time I felt like I was an interloper and trespassing on his own territory. So I was looking across towards St Paul's Cathedral from across the Yarra with the Princess Bridge. And I feel the way he painted, I think, well, yeah, you own it, mate. That's yours. So those sort of things come through, but I think it's nice when you go further and back in time, and also when you go into other areas. So I enjoy watching, all of those Midsummer Murder type things, or if you go to Wallanders or some of those ones, and you look at the compositions of film, and they're done as panning shots, and this is probably the animation influence. The excitement can be made as you almost run a camera across a scene rather than a painter just facing it and seeing if that gives you a design insight. That whole thing about, I was talking about leaving neutral space or that into it. And that's only a new area that I'm starting to explore. I don't think I understand it fully myself yet. It'll take a painting or two to work out what I'm trying to do there.
Sure.
And it could be dead end, but I think that is a good stimulus, is television, because it's dealing with that horizontal format anyway. And I think sometimes changing the shapes of your paper and looking at what people do with wide panoramic verticals or even really long wise verticals becomes something. And was sort of involved in the selection of Camberwell and the number of squares that are being there. It's really fashionable this year to be doing squares. And so that becomes a sort of an influence. And then in terms of painters, I think you just look and think through some of the painters and how they work. So a case in point is if you take Streeton's Purple Noon's Transparent Might and you look at that composition, and it's in at the NGV, and if you go and take your rulers, and this is from Colin Johnson who alerted it to us, if you cross the diagonals and go up to that painting, in the middle you'll find a savage little red dot underneath the painting, near enough to be the centre, which is a proof that some of these golden section ideas of thirds, quarters, diagonals were very much prevalent a century ago, and they've become either unpopular or, that whole revolutionary, not wanting to paint like the traditionalists movement has come out of finding it too constricting. But I think it is an alert to, if you want to improve paintings, start thinking of some of these golden section rulings. They're not rules, but positionings. Centres in paintings, so often overlooked. I think I said the Walter Magilton one in there, that he avoids them like the plague, and that's right. That's good for what he wants to do. But look for paintings where they actually employ the centre in a painting, and you'll be surprised historically just how many did.
Sure. In your article titled Back to the Drawing Board, which was featured in the 2014 issue of Australian Artist magazine, you identify that projecting or tracing a drawing onto a substrate to begin a painting is a subject of ongoing debate regarding an artist's integrity. Do you believe projecting or tracing drawings is a valid process for an artist to use?
Yeah, but I think it needs to be understood that I think every artist quietly likes to measure their ability or their talent to do things, and I think there's I think I listed them as three methods of approaching. One is where you just with acute observation. One is by just tracing it down. And so, for instance, in a boat, you'll get a cleaner line if you trace it down than you will if you work the pencil over and over into it and then rub it out and correct it and up. But one will be an easy and fantastic result, and one will be a worked, damaging the paper result. But I think you need to be able to do them both at times and understand it. And I think, and the other is just free-forming, just, where you're not actually restricted by reality on shaping and things like that. Is a lovely free-form drawing comes into it. But I think all of those aspects of drawing are beautiful to explore. And each artist, again, like gouache, you make your own call on it. The only problem with projection is you are limited to the photograph and the angle, and you even think of movements like the cubists and stuff like that. They're talking about seeing things from different spaces and angles. Well, sometimes that is about the drawing, is you're exploring and understanding the object, and you have a better understanding because of the immersion and the crummy drawing. Imagine how many times, when you're drawing an ellipse on a bowl, you don't draw it once, you draw it 20 times. Right.
So these days you tend to more freehand your drawings onto your paper. Yeah.
There was a time I had a projection machine in advertising when you're working with deadlines and you're trying to get products accurate. That was the obvious way to go, and you can become a slave to it, but it weakens you as a... morally it weakens you, but drawing wise it weakens you, and then when you actually start to draw more directly, your drawing improves. You are a better drawer for it.
Great.
Probably the same argument working outdoors, indoors.
Yeah, sure.
You can do both, but you need to have done them both.
Sure, absolutely. technically, are you at a point where you feel happy with the quality of your work, or do you believe you still have more to learn?
No, I think, again, Mary and I, when we talk about painting, I think the quality of a painter is found by the paintings you never see. And I think the ones you see, you want to put out and have some reasonable pride in, other than just that you're meeting a deadline. So I think there's always something in a painting you want to better and change, and there might be something in your palette or your mood or your level of edging, or the very subtle things are the things that you always got the ambition to improve. But every now and then you do a painting and you go, that's all right. And I think it's good for an artist to say that's all right.
Sure, it is. Keeps you going.
Yeah. Golf. If you stuff up a shot, you get one good shot, you'll keep going.
Some of your paintings which seem separate from your maritime subjects are your biomorphic abstractions that allow you space to experiment and trial new techniques, which sometimes feed back into your figurative subject matter. These biomorphic abstractions seem to come from another part of your mind. Can you explain more about them?
Yeah, I think you've got analytical mind and you've got a free-spirited side to your mind.
Right.
And, a psychologist would make more sense of it than I would. But I think I've seen artists that really work and labour, and they really seem to thrive on getting it right and really working very, very methodically, very intensely. And I never see them smiling. And then I see another painter who's just gone off chipping away with the paint, and you're always smiling.
Okay.
And being a happy person, I kind of figure, well, there's got to be something in that.
Right.
And it's not, you can ignore the disciplines, but you have to find some fun in it as well. So
Sure.
the biomorphic is that exact sort of equation where you're still learning how to paint, but you're doing it in such an unreferenced way that whatever you do is right.
Yeah.
And so you can start to smile on how accurate it is, and you learn things from it.
Sure. And how often do you find yourself exploring that subject matter, Julian?
Sometimes I reckon you're doing it in the palette all the time. You throw down paint in the palette and the ink blots, you can't help but see things in it. Sketchbook.
Yes.
Sometimes you just... I mean, that's another one I always recommend is paint with a very fixed amount of time. Give yourself only 7 minutes and just go like the clappers and paint it.
Sure.
And go big, paint a 7-minute painting. It's a waste of paper.
Right.
But it really forces you to decide, and you become instinctive with your palette, and you'll invariably plunge into the wrong colour and you'll get winds of violet.
Yeah.
And it'll be destructive, but it'll be revealing as well.
Sure. Is that work, those biomorphic abstractions, something that you really want to be recognised for, Julian? Because it is quite a break from your usual maritime, marine subjects.
It is in teaching circles and possibly in some demonstration. It's not that I don't take them seriously, but they came about because the Vic set up a contemporary exhibition, and now I've sort of found a contemporary moment, or more contemporary moment, historically, ironically, that sort of appealed to me because it sort of had a beneficial side. And then I ran a few of it, and I called them biomorphic indulgence. So I gave it a sort of very wanky sort of a tone.
Yeah.
And that they didn't do bad. There was a few people kind of liked them and stuff like that. And that's not a reason to keep doing them, but it's a validation that they're not absolutely wasting your time either. Known for them? No, probably not. It'd be like, a musician probably has a hit and they go, why did it have to be that one?
Sure. Regarding your materials, I understand you use pan watercolours. Have you experimented with tube watercolours paints at all?
No, I'm not sure where that one came from. No, I probably thought the opposite. I've got a really beautiful box of pan colours, and I don't know what to do with them really, other than you can rub off onto them. Pans, I think, are very good if you're doing very small work, but if you're working really broad, you can't go past using tube paints. So all tube paints are my direction.
All right, so you're working with tube paints,
tube paints, yeah.
Watercolours.
But then I set them up as in the wells, and they become their own pan sort of value. So maybe that's where that research has come from. Or it could well be something I said once.
So did you start with using pan watercolours and then progress into using tube watercolours?
It may have been that when I was travelling overseas in a sketchbook and just the immediacy of being in tight spaces or on the move, it's not a bad way of working in a sketchbook. And it might even be working almost postcard size, and then the pans are just a very easy travel one. And that might have been where that comment's come from.
Sure, that makes sense. You prefer to use a combination of large, medium and small brushes in the styles of rounds, ovals, filberts and riggers. You also like using a stiff, bristled half-inch square for rubs and scrubs in your paintings. What brands do you prefer for your brushes?
When you're teaching and demonstrating and you share your brushes around, very often you come back with better brushes than you lend out. And that's how I've got a couple of Escodas, I'm sure. And they're probably a more expensive brush than a Neef.
Sure.
But I'm brutal with brushes, and I'm not certain that I get much out of a very good brush. I tend to feel like I'm painting in short daubs of paint. I'm not trying to put down beautiful washes, and I'm not trying to tick in with elaborate marking and that. So I'm always rotating the brushes. So in the demo, I'll pick up a brush, put it down, pick up a brush, put it down. I'm not a one brush person. And my happiest moments when one hand fills up and you've got about 4 to 20 brushes in your hand or something, and you're searching for the one that makes the right mark.
Sure.
It's probably a reflection on personality and perhaps not being professionally organised with brushes either, that you're searching for the one to write and you're rotating through and trying to get something to work rather than knowing how to work. And possibly if you painted harder and longer, you'd probably discover more about your brushes and simplify it down.
Sure.
But I feel like, I like having a big fist of brushes.
Sure.
Those oil painters can't have it. Look at Mary's set there. So I like the way the oil painter's got all these brushes in their hand. I feel like that completes the image.
Great. But one thing I've noticed, Julian, you don't usually use a larger mop-style brush.
I don't like the mops at all. I feel like they hold too much water and paint. Okay. And in the demo, you'll see I'm talk a bit about having the water on the page, and I'm introducing drier paint into it and letting it mix on the page a little bit more. So a wet page is as good a palette as anything. And so rather than doing a big well of paint and then applying it, I'm probably almost just soaking the paper a lot and then adding the colour into it. And again, this is probably just the difference in artists. Ted Danzy would really work with the mops, and he does it really well, and he's got these lovely moments and marks in it that I don't get, that he gets in his work.
Sure.
I sometimes feel like what they do deliver is sharper, pointed marks.
Yeah.
And for what I'm painting, when I'm sort of looking at softer seas or floating clouds, sometimes the shape of the brush marks that you leave can influence the look of the painting. So a lot of sharp stabbing marks may activate it too much for my liking, whereas some rolling rounded marks or some stretched out filbert comb marks break down and they feel a bit squarer. So squarer marks are not as directional as a stabbing mark, perhaps, and a rounded mark is a soft mark. So for portraiture work, I don't like a sharp pointed line in the face. I prefer them to be rolling around into it. So that's kind of where I think different brushes come into it. And that would be one I tend to avoid, the mops. But all the others I love to have in there. But they're only ever on the page for about a second or two, and then I'm moving on to another brush for no sensible reason.
Sure. Now, Julian, will we ever see the day where you collaborate with a paintbrush company and create your own style paintbrush?
No.
Are you very certain about that?
Look, I think there's better disciplined painters that would actually help more people with it than I ever would. I think mine would only be a pretense. Okay. Because I don't need it in my own work. I find out what the brushes are. The Andy Anderson one, I mean, that's a beautiful brush. And if I could have been the inventor of that, I would have been. But that's the only time when I'd think about it. And I don't think I think enough about the brushes and what they can do to warrant taking on that one. Sure.
Your preference is to work on half sheets of 300 GSM cold press watercolour paper, as the sides tend to be close to the golden section proportions. You favour the brands of Arches, Saunders or Bohong. Have you tried different paper brands throughout your life, and why do you prefer the aforementioned ones?
They're good because all of them you can put some masking tape around them and they don't rip.
Sure.
Others have beautiful grains, Bockingfords and the like have good grains, and I do go into those ones. But in teaching, I think you're looking for a stable canvas, so it's a bit of a workhorse paper. The Arche is a little bit more expensive, and if you listen to the old-time painters, they reckon it's not nearly as good as it once was. Saunders I find pretty consistent. I don't mind it. The Balhong's good. It feels a bit clay, a bit rough and grainy at times, and when you go onto the flip side, the back side of it, it's got a little bit of a metallic line can appear in a big wash, I've found. And so I feel like with the others you get two sides, even though you're paying more for it. But the Balhong as a student paper, you know, in life classes or something like that, was quite reasonable to work with for it, and it rubs back well. So you can scratch into it or rub into it quite nicely.
Right. Moving on. You share a studio with your partner, the Australian tonal realist painter Mary Hyde. Do you care to comment on how you and Mary got together and how your relationship has developed over the years?
I think, you know, meeting through the Vic Arts, so you meet through painting and you recognise something in each other that makes it comfortable being painters together, and it creates more comment on the outside world where people are, how does two painters exist? And the truth is, I think how do any two people exist? So obviously there are moments, but there's not much artistic friction between us in any way, except being a teacher and having a big mouth, I tend to probably intrude on Mary's painting more than she on mine. But she's very patient with me at times. And I think in terms of travelling and, you know, even if we're watching a telly show and we see an image and think, that's really good, we'll just pause and photograph just for the fun of it. If we're driving on a road, we'll stop, even if it means we might pull over, you know, 5 times in a kilometre or something like that. And there's an equal understanding of why, because you're searching for it. And sometimes, you know, your reference moments, they may never make it to the canvas either. Yeah. We often drive along and we'll go, bags it, it's mine, go shotgun on a scene. The frustration for me with Mary, she paints so well and consistently, she churns through far more scenes than I ever get to. So the good ones are always gone, I reckon. But no, we just kind of enjoy it. And I think by being an oil painter and a watercolourist, there's a lovely synergy in that to explore and see. A game we often play is driving along is you sort of try and nominate how you'd mix a certain colour. So you'd be seeing a distant hill or often a mid-aread mountain or hill, and you go, where would you go with it? And we'd be sort of seeing where an oilist would go to a watercolourist, and there'd be differences. Often when we're painting on location, separate, without seeing each other's work, you put them up next to each other and you'll see colour signatures between them that actually relate, which is nice and endorsing for each of us to feel like, yeah, we might have hit the right colour there.
Sure.
So the things that win out of it are far more of interest than any sort of perceived ideas people might have that it's a clash. We've exhibited together regularly, we've travelled together regularly, we share conversations, share books, all manner of things, so collaborative side of it. And I do like to be in relationship with other artists and talk with another painter.
Sure.
Mary's got my measure, so you know, I've got a huge ego, but Mary's really good at deflation and in the right way, so you feel grounded in a paint relationship like that.
Fantastic, Julian.
It is.
I imagine sharing a studio with Mary would be advantageous to your practice, as you always have somebody nearby to bounce ideas off or to ask their opinion about something you're working on. How have you found the experience of sharing your studio with Mary over the years? Now, you have touched upon somewhat what that's like.
There's another aspect, and that is actually, you know, like when we were filming today and I became unaware of you in the room.
Sure.
And the same will happen when you're painting. You become absorbed by your own work, and you can really zone in on your palette, your canvas and your mind. So we can be in the same room working for hours, almost with a, not disregard, but just a zoning off from each other. And around about 4 o'clock, we'll probably start looking to see who's going to crack and cook dinner that night. And being a watercolourist, I'm usually the most distracted, so it'll be me. But there is those lovely moments and where you're connected, but you can disconnect very easily. And you know, you think about painters out on location, they might have a bit of conversation early on, and then they'll disappear. And have you ever watched how painters seem to, maybe there's subtle signals, they wind up their paintings almost simultaneously.
Sure.
And that's kind of a synergy moment. So they're zoned off, but they're connected.
It's interesting because you work in such close proximity in your studio.
Yeah.
You're set up on one side and Mary's set up on the other side.
But then with activities, with teaching going out or other activities, family related and things like that, it's not always that you're there. Often it's ships in the night, or ships in the day.
Sure.
So the times we are together, we kind of enjoy it.
Fantastic. Now, Julian, let me ask you another question. Do you feel as though you would have been able to get this far as you have in your art career and in your life if you hadn't met Mary?
No, I think definitely my life looked up and my painting became more serious in that context. And I think that was timing as well. I'm wondering, when do artists really actually grow up? And I think there's possibly a time in their mid-40s, 50s, where people start to wake up as painters and maybe they start to produce better, whether it's a slow maturing process, whether that's the peak. We often sort of sit around wondering, when is the end? When is the time we should stop painting? And the joke amongst painters is, you know, when I'm starting to f them up, you should come and knock me on the head, you know, sort of. And it's not that, but there is a time when I think you hit your painting prime. I reckon it may be 40 to 70, 50 to 70, something like that. And that, I reckon you'll probably have more insights over time as you talk to other artists. I reckon it's a question to say, when do you reckon your prime is?
Sure.
And also, what do you do at your end game? Because I think that's a really revealing one, is to, you know, the painters retire.
Yeah.
Should they retire?
And these are some of the things that you'd be pondering at this point in your life.
Yeah. Thank you. But again, you know, you move on, and so that's another reason why I always felt like my retirement plan would be to move into maritime art, and I'd probably just start to leave teaching and anything that needs. So the biomorphism will go, and you know, some of the landscape will disappear, and the snow gums will always be. It's been one of my pet subjects. It's a sort of a measuring point for me, and it's been going for 50 years or thereabouts. So I reckon I would just retire into maritime art, brush ruling.
It does feel like a mature person's subject. Maritime art, I must say.
It's the armchair, isn't it?
Sure. Mary and yourself also exhibit work together frequently, particularly through your group exhibitions 5, which you founded in 2019 with fellow artists Ted Danzy, Lucille Tam, and John Hunt, who now lives in Germany. You tend to exhibit yearly, and the work is consistently of high quality. I understand the idea for the group came about while having a drink at Il Corretto Pizza restaurant in Carlton, Victoria. Can you explain more about the development of the group and its purpose?
I reckon it stemmed from exactly what we're still facing, and that is that there's possibly, I'll approach it delicately. I think there's a half validity in that. I feel like we've seen a slow decline in traditional painting. I'll just make that as a simple statement, and it's not meant to be a argument. It's more, I just think we've seen a decline. I think we've seen a loss in it.
Sure.
And I think we all felt as sort of winners of Artists of the Year or painters within the Vic Arts Society that we'd like to exhibit a more qualified professional exhibition together, and that was probably very high-ended of us to do that. But that was the premise of it, and I think it was Ted. You know, we could put a really good show together. So it was as simple as a statement like that.
Sure.
We'd worked on council together. We were friends. We enjoyed each other. John Hunt was in the mix there, and he works in a far more avant-garde sort of a style, but he has an understanding of everything. He's come from a more traddy background, so but he provided energy, so we'll let him in. But the rest of it was just a nice balancing act, and felt like it was good. And the names changed. So Ray Hewitt was in on the very formative years, and for different reasons people move on and try different things.
Sure.
It may have run its course. I don't know whether we'll do more fives, but I think it'll reinvent in another form. 7, 8. We've got a whole lot of numbers to work through.
Between the five of you, you exhibit works in gouache, watercolour and oil, featuring subjects such as landscapes, florals and maritime paintings. What do you ultimately hope to achieve with 5 in the coming years? And you've mentioned
Probably answered it,
its course already.
I think it becomes the lead to something else. And, we talked earlier about Agra sort of perhaps finishing up or winding up.
Yeah.
And I think all things decay or finish.
Sure.
You get the best of the moments at some time. And your best of it might be different. Somebody might be looking at the very same scenarios and think this is the best of it for them where it's going.
Yeah.
But I think the best of some of the exhibitions we've had has passed. It's hard because John was a real founding force in it, and he went to Berlin.
That's right.
And to stage his works became harder and harder to send them over and to exhibit them. And so sometimes the chemistry just changes, and recognition of an end game, and it ties in with the other conversation we had a minute ago. So you can find that you can run things just for the sake of it too long, and I like the idea you jump out while it's been good, and then you rebuild and do something else if you've got the energy.
Once John went to Germany, did you immediately find another?
Lucille came in. And we kept John in play, so he did exhibit with Lucille as well.
Yeah.
But John was in Berlin by then, so he just had his work, so he's in name only. And then it really revolved around Ted, Mary, self and Lucille.
Yep.
And we had a few guest artists. We had Bob Senior and Barb McManus in at different times, and they were great to have in it. And there was no reason they couldn't have continued on. Just as it unfolded, we went further on in different areas, so different conversations.
Fair enough. Nowadays, you seem more focused on collaborating with Ben Winspear, Mark Balagi, and the Brandonites, or the Brandon Circle. Can you explain more about your involvement with these artists?
I reckon exactly the things that you're exploring. So the things that you're looking to try and connect to and foster and create out of revisiting traditions, if you'd like, or continuance of it, is exactly what the Brandonites is all about. And we just meet in the Brandon Hotel. Don't tell anyone it's the Brandon Hotel. It's a great pub. But we just meet there, and we're all very self-important, of course. But it's just a connection point of people again, and that's where I think a new circle of artists could easily grow out of it. Hence the word circle as well.
Right.
And it's still in a forming stage, but there's an exhibition at the Vic Arts in September, which will be in the Cato Gallery, and that'll be the first showing of the Brandonites.
Great.
And if people come along to it, or have come along to it, depending on when the editing's done, but that'll be a fun moment to do it. And those same people are also being involved in some of the maritime exhibitions. So we've got the National Maritime Exhibition for the Australian Society of Marine Artists. And it's coming to Melbourne. And that'll be another showing of a lot of those same names, as well as the wider field as well.
That's great. Well, it's very exciting knowing that you've got this new circle of artists, the Brandonites.
Yeah.
To look forward to. Great.
And Emilio.
Yes.
Emilio's going to get an invite in there somewhere.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you. Moving forward, regarding the sale of paintings, you have stated, quote, "It is difficult for an artist to operate with any real confidence in today's art market. Artists must continue their exploration of the right way to paint for themselves with a regard for acceptance in the wider art landscape," unquote. I understand you started to become more recognised in the Melbourne art market when you began painting alpine snow gum trees. Why do you think this particular subject matter helped gain you recognition and solidified your place as one of Victoria's leading watercolour painters?
Oh, okay, big question. Look, if you want to make a living out of art, go and get a job. Is probably the short, hard answer.
Yeah.
So people will come to you and go, "Look, I'm thinking of making myself a professional artist," and I'm going, "Well, what do you do for a job? Because do you like eating?" And the whole thing is it's such an unstable sort of market in terms of being certain of sales, but more relying on the sale of paintings. really makes artists fairly unattractive people to be around. They don't mean to, but they're trying to sell, and they're not enjoying their painting, is my belief. And somebody will live totally for the hunger of selling paintings and love it, and that's right for them.
Sure.
But I think it's a danger. And then I think often what happens is, the terms, professional and amateur. And I think a professional, is making a living out of their painting. And I think that means that they're painting a job. And an amateur isn't necessarily a less qualified painter, but they're in that position where they can really enjoy painting what they want, when they want, where they want, and not if they want. So I think there's merit in the status of being an amateur if you see the language as to what it really refers to, not in terms of how well you paint.
Sure.
A professional probably paints more directed, and you can recognise their works and it's marketable. So for me, the Snow Gums could well have become my professional output, because there's always been a reasonable popularity for them and individuality with it. And they were certainly the paintings that helped to establish reputation. But I think if I painted Snow Gums day in, day out, I wouldn't be enjoying it at all.
Sure.
So again, like earlier, you move around your genres, and if I move into portraiture, that's not a big selling area, but it's an area I really enjoy.
Right.
And marine painting of old English sea battles, for some reason, they don't walk out the door in a hurry either, but you want to do them. So you kind of have to work out that you love your painting and hang on the merits of what you want to do. And if it's really an income-based one, if you think about the hourly rate, there's better jobs.
Sure. Well said, Julian. For artists who have put a body of work together and feel as though they are ready to begin selling their paintings, what advice can you provide in regards to marketing their work?
Look, I wouldn't be the right person to answer that one, and I think marketing is the interesting one, but we're witnessing it everywhere, that people are trying to make a reputation for themselves and put it out there and promote. And the difficulty is that we really need to cull a lot of artists. There's a lot of painters out there.
There is.
And they all want to be in the same space, and there's not enough oxygen for us all to be successful painters. So you may as well be a happy painter or a successful painter. I don't know whether you get both.
Yeah.
But for a young artist, nor do you want to rain on any parade and say it doesn't happen. So some artists do extraordinarily well, and they just find something very personal that they like doing a lot of, and they get productive. And you've got to wish them well. But John Hunt, he loves to quote Clint Eastwood, and a man's got to know his limitations. And I reckon every artist needs to know what their limitations are and whether they've got the hunger to really drive and do sales, in which case they're doing postings every couple of days on Facebook and Instagram, and they're fronting up for every exhibition, and they're fronting up to do every demonstration. And I probably have a reputation and known for doing some of that. It's not something I thirst for, but I'll do them, and I feel like I'm doing it because I like to respond to need rather than I'm doing a self-promotion. But it probably is the same thing. So if an artist is wanting to go forward, I think it's putting yourself out there and exposing yourself to all manner of things, and being seen and vocal, opinionated.
Sure.
And they're dangerous things, because you can also get anti-advertising. Maybe there's no such thing as bad advertising, but if people are chatting about you and stuff.
Sure.
But it's an area that some people really like and others don't necessarily like it.
I guess artists, they're not really business people, are they?
Yeah, look, it's a curiosity. Is that a truth, or is it a sort of a thing where we say it? And they can be. It's not hard to, have a bit of a look at the figures and work it out and stuff. The only thing is, as you become more business-minded, I think your decision-making on painting becomes more about how to operate your business than it is to be artistic and explorative. So maybe the term artist is the hold-up. If you think back to illustration and commercial art when I went into it, commercial art was fine because I didn't have to generate any real art integrity. People bought your wrist to do jobs for them.
Right.
And so if you're putting yourself as an artist in that vein, but you feel very commercial, and you don't feel very creative perhaps out of it. Some people do get the perfect marriage on it and work it out. Many don't, though.
Sure. You believe Robert Wade, Joseph Zverkovic and Greg Allen are some of the most affluent Victorian-based watercolourists. Are there any others that you would add to this list today?
Affluent probably refers to money, I think, but I think in terms of effective and perhaps they're the ones, particularly Robert Wade, Bob Wade. He should be represented in the NGV, and he's not. And this is sort of a bit of a bugbear in the circle is we've had in Melbourne some really, really effective watercolourists. Very, they've been on the world stage. Let's go with Bob Wade. So he's gone over to Morocco and he's gone to America and he's opened the door there for all artists following. And he probably had, I'm sure he had some help, but he was a bit of a vanguard or a pathfinder. And he's gone there and taken on the world. Somebody like a Herman Pekel or a Joseph Zbutchvik have gone to China and opened up doors in there and put Australian art on the map. And you feel like our NGV has no interest in them because they're painters of the past.
Yeah.
And I don't see that. I think they're actually the ones that have actually path found for a lot of art going forward.
Sure.
And, the artists you think that, there'll be circles that will frown on your Rotary circuits and your art societies. And I feel like that's so easy to do and be trite about. But they're very valued painters and they're all very as genuine as anyone going out there.
Right.
So in terms of that, Bob Wade, number one. I think he's like the father of watercolour in Melbourne. Wow. David Taylor, you think about the David Taylor teachings and how many people he's reached and taught. Herman Pekel only because, what an excitement. And Greg Allen because I just always, when I first saw Australian Artist and saw his watercolour articles, they were the ones where I felt that is a magic medium and he has magic talents in his work as I see it.
That's great. How about overseas? Who would you mention are some of the finest watercolourists working abroad?
Let's go with the best of them. I reckon it'd be David Curtis in England because he's quirky and he's probably more known as an oil, but he's a very good watercolourist at all.
Sure.
An oil. But for mine, I don't tend to pull out too many names because I think you go through your Facebook scrolls and stuff like that and you find so many artists and there's every two scrolls there's another really good artist. But I do like some of the ones over in America. Andy Evanson, he's doing those lovely minimalist sort of Midwest paintings. Sure. I might have his location wrong, but quite beautiful scenes. In current circles, the people I talk and work with enjoy their company. And then in my own sort of explorations in marine art, then I kind of like the English ones. There's, American Mark Myers, who's over in England as well, but Jeff Hunt, Derek Gardner, who's no longer with us, some of those painters. And then you go back further, there's some absolute unknowns. The best of them ever was a guy called John Chancellor, sailed all his life. So he generally was a painter and a mariner.
Right.
And he published a couple of books in his very later years, and you can't get them. They're just gold. Okay. And I got one, but there's two of them, so I'm searching for the red covered version. John Chancellor, tell me if you find it. But he would be one of my all-time favourites just because of the genuineness of his painting mixed with what he really knew about sailing.
Sure, great. Concerning your involvement with the Australian Society of Maritime Artists, I understand you were the Vice President for several years before taking over from Karen Bloomfield and becoming President. What does your role being President of the Australian Society of Maritime Artists entail?
You write an article, you organise the Zoom meetings, and we'll be doing the national exhibition. So but you're not doing it alone. You sort of just be the figurehead. So I'm that bit out the front of the boat.
Sure.
But no, you're an engine room. You're doing stuff as well, and you've got your supporters. So it's a small-bodied society, and Mary is a very decent painter, is also the VP with me in Victoria. So she's come in. And Mark Bagley, who we've mentioned, is the treasurer. So collectively, there's three of us. We're effectively all presidents.
Sure.
We're all treasurers. We're all sort of keeping an eye on things.
Right.
And the handover was really sweet. So it's a body that's been very strong in Sydney, and I think their main membership's up there. but I think they've been running the show for a while, and so I think they were actually pretty happy for interlopers from Melbourne to come down and take it over for a while, and we brought the National down here because we've got the energy to run it and the gallery space at the Vix to try and play with.
Right.
And so that's kind of the area. This, what we're doing now, I'm thinking maybe a part of where we're going as well, a sort of a demonstrative, educative arm of the society for developing artists. And I think the other one is I still have ambitions as to what we could do on an international stage. And that's self-driven, because I know my subjects would do better overseas than they would here.
Sure.
Not necessarily in sales, I'm not thinking that, but in terms of interest and recognition, they'd be better understood.
Right, right. Now, what do you ultimately hope to achieve during your presidency of the Australian Society of Maritime Artists?
Okay, so all of the aforementioned, but it would be nice to get through it without being burnt out. And
Yes.
if you look at art societies and presidents and how burnt out they are, so my reflections are going on John Hunt. Vic Arts was just about down and out. You know, we don't think art societies fold, but they do. Agra's a proof of it. And Vix is just as vulnerable as any art society to go under, not through lack of funds, but just through lack of leadership and energy and drive. And John Hunt was at a time when it was just a little bit stale, and he came in and financially it was just about broke. And his energy dragged it forward, his enthusiasm. But the cost was that I think it just burnt him so badly. And I think part of his moving to Germany was to find different fields, calmer fields for himself.
Right.
And so if I'm sort of a president here of ASMA, and it's not the same at all as the VIX, because we don't have a building to maintain and run, and it's a very niche, easy to run society.
Sure.
But I'd like to get out of without getting scarred.
Right, right.
So looking for the next heir apparent.
Sure. Now, more generally, Julian, what would you like to achieve with your work in the next 5 years?
I think for me, I've started to turn away from doing direct teaching, workshops and demonstrations. I'll still continue doing them, and I'll probably continue the online in a reducing capacity. And I think for mine, a goal would be to achieve a far better discipline of painting. You know, if I refer to Mary, she's very disciplined and there's no nonsense with her. She comes, picks up the brushes and starts painting. And I'll tend to do things or get distracted, presidents of societies, that sort of stuff, or involvement with other things. And I think probably for mine, a calming thing would be to concentrate and produce a body of work. And that may mean finding a marine project. And we've done the John Nichol book. There may be a form of a book to come up with. My ambition is one day to illustrate or paint Treasure Island.
Sure.
Because it's where we started. And so that would be fitting. So that's kind of the sort of project thinking.
Great.
And sort of exhibiting internationally.
Sure. Are you able to provide an overview of what a typical day's work entails for you?
Yeah. I could, and I don't want to tell you, but I'm a slow riser.
Okay.
I'm easily distracted. The phone rings a lot. I have great pretensions by about 10 o'clock about what I'm going to paint that day. And I have great resentments about 4 o'clock on what I've painted that day. I do paint well, though. When I do paint probably the old illustration training and the deadlining and stuff like that. When I do get to something, I can be very effective at my painting. But I think I admire Mary for her continuity and consistency and standard of painting. And for mine, I think I'm probably too easily distracted and away from it. And that's something you live with and work with. And it doesn't show on the surface. Your paintings come out and I meet deadlines for shows. But you're probably always compromising yourself just a bit when you're doing it that way.
Sure.
Candle at two ends, that sort of stuff.
Right.
It'd be good, I think, for me to be more continuous or consistent with painting. And that would be, turn the phone off.
Sure. And can you paint every day, Julian, or do you find it exhausting?
No, I think I could paint every day. My manner would be very relaxed. So watercolour does allow itself to have a stop-start.
Sure.
You almost need to have that rest in it. I think every painter, every student I've taught to say is, move away from your table, go and get a coffee, and then come back and look at your painting.
Yeah.
Don't stay there at the same spot.
Sure.
I think that's true of all painters. Stepping back in an oil context, watercolours, I reckon you've got to leave the room.
Leave the room rather than stepping back.
Yeah, I think you need to leave the room.
That's good advice. Approaching the end of the interview, regarding advice to students of the watercolour medium, you have recommended to, quote, paint and draw in a sketchbook regularly. This is an ideal way of recording your travels and a personal space for developing your painting skills and thoughts. Look at other artists' work, particularly early Australian Renaissance and European paintings, for their academic training and understanding of composition, unquote. What other advice would you give to students of watercolour that are serious about improving their work?
Yeah, okay. Squeeze more paint into your wells. Don't try and put small amounts in all the time, because I think that's the frustration, is that you build up big juicy wells of paint. Be generous with your brushes. Buy good materials. Understand your processes. Bob Wade again. Failing to prepare is preparing to fail. And it's such a sage sort of a statement to make. And I think it's probably for a student is actually get serious about setting your paintings up. And the way to do that is sometimes I think you need to embrace a little bit of ego, particularly with watercolour, and actually feel very confident about what you're doing and why you're doing it. And build yourself up a little bit with it, and then attack and do your painting and be great with it. Because I think it's too easy to feel like the medium's got you beaten otherwise.
Sure. Well said, Julian. Looking forward, on Saturday, September 9th this year, you'll be providing a landscape and composition watercolour workshop at the Australian Watercolour Muster Biennale, which runs between the 6th and 11th of September in Cairns, North Queensland. Can you provide some information about the Australian Watercolour Muster Biennale and what goes on there? Yeah,
look, it's easy to find on Gallery 247, I think is where it's actually hosted. It's a fun thing to do. You won't sell. You may do well, but it's more about the community and Win Vogel.
Sure.
And I think it's that you're doing it for a good purpose. You're looking after someone who's really dug deep into trying to create something up in Queensland. And I think for that reason it's worth just doing it for her.
Sure.
And so in that one, I'll come and I'll do a half sheet because it then has a chance to go to Fabriano.
Oh, that's great.
And I'll go up there, and there's a number of really good painters going up there. Richard Chow doing portrait work.
Sure.
It's worth seeing the stable. I haven't even got any sort of sense that mine's necessarily going to run, but I think it still could be a nice sort of a destination to head to. We'll see
Absolutely.
how it goes. Yeah.
Beautiful. In conclusion, do you have any upcoming exhibitions, projects, or teaching opportunities for the remainder of 2023 that you would like to share?
The only two is the National's going to be important to me for the Australian Society of Marine Artists, and that'll be at Vic Arts in late October into early November. So I think it's October 26th to November 6th, and that'll be an event that I'll be really pleased to get past and have work.
Sure.
And I know it will be, because putting paintings together on a wall is something that's understood, and there's a willingness to do it. So looking forward to that side of it. And that'll be done in association with Mary and Mark and Ted Danzy will be in it. There'll be a number of others. So a lot of the people that you've been working with will be in something like that.
That's fantastic.
You get an invite. You'll come along.
Thank you, Julian. Appreciate that.
That'll be the major one.
Now, Julian Bruere, it has been an absolute pleasure working with you today. I thank you very much for your willingness to invite me into your studio, and just for your overall dedication to the watercolour medium over the years, and your nature. You're a very humble person. You're very well recognised in the Melbourne art world when it comes to traditional realism and watercolour painting in particularly. But you don't really boast too much. You're a very modest person. I can see that, and I really appreciate that. I appreciate what you're doing. And I'll just just like to ask you if you'd like to state your contact details so that viewers can get in touch, whether it's to purchase work or to see about studying with you.
So you'll see a name. The name will be on screen somewhere, I'm sure, at some stage. So if you do that name with artist@gmail.com, that'll email me. Love getting emails. Feel free to make a contact.
Sure.
If I don't respond, send it in capitals. I'll understand. And the rest of it is I've got a Facebook page and I've got a Instagram page, so they're worth having a bit of explore on. I almost have a website. I will have a website page on the Australian Society of Marine Artists page. As I say, it's a high standard society, but we are always on the lookout for good marine painters.
Sure.
And we all know now what a marine painting is.
Right.
And on the other side, Emilio, can I say thank you for what you've done, and not only this day, but all the work you are doing, because you're doing it in a very dedicated fashion for all the right reasons. And I wish you well in the ventures and, skill-based art and learning. I hope that does very well for you.
Thank you, Julian.
And I look forward to seeing it on the world stage with the Australian Society of Marine Artists.
I hope so.
Good on you,
One
mate.
day. Thank you very much, Julian.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Cheers.
that.
You as well.
Thank you.
Genuinely.